By way of introduction, my name is David Phillips. I run an innovation consulting firm here in Charlotte called Faster Glass, and I get to be your MC/facilitator for today. I'll go ahead and just say it. I have the easiest job in the world today, at least to start off with, because I get to introduce a leader who needs no introduction. How about that? Mayor Vilas is going to kick us off our Housing and Job Summit. I told you I had the easiest job in the world.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're here today because the community, the people that care greatly about this community, the elected officials from across our county believe that we can have critical needs, and we're facing these critical needs in housing and jobs. We've all agreed that a good-paying job leads to a way that you can have housing that's affordable. But more importantly, often when you have a family where people work, we build stronger families, and when we build stronger families, we build stronger communities. So I want to say, and especially give recognition to the Charlotte City Council commitments to these issues. Believe me, there's not a meeting, whether it's informal or formal, short or long, that this idea about how do we make our city better for people to live and for people to work isn't discussed. I want to thank the many people that are joining us today. I saw several of our community action group people coming in. I saw people walking in just because they heard about this and they wanted to come and see it and just be a part of it. I know that we have our businesses here. We have many of our neighborhood leaders. We have many of our nonprofit partners. And I like to say that without everybody pulling together, nothing really good gets done. So I want to say thank you and give you a hand for being here today. Now I know that you often hear us talk about partnerships, but one of our most important partnerships in this effort is Mecklenburg County. And I'd like to recognize the members of the County Commission who have joined us today. I know I saw Commissioner Altman. Please stand and be recognized. And do I have any other county commissioners in the room with us today? So thank you very much for the attention and that you're giving to this and the partnership that we need to have to form. What is different about this day is that we have really been very intentional. Now, you know, I worked in the city when we started out with housing and affordable housing as an initiative, and that was a very, very, very long time ago. It's been over 20 years that the city has had successful, affordable housing through our Housing Trust Fund. But you know, in 20 years, things change. The city has changed. While we created over 10,000 affordable housing units, we now are challenged by something very different: the growth in our city, the changes in our demographics. Now, we're especially grateful for our voters who gave their approval of $50 million in affordable housing bonds last November. But what do we do with that $50 million? How do we leverage it? How do we create partnerships? How are we successful and effective? How can we actually make sure that in this community you can see the change that we want to have? So over the next 2 days, we're going to look at what has changed in the last 20 years and what we need to be thinking about now. We actually, I believe, need to adjust our policies and our investments because of the changes that we're seeing. You know, the City Council often talks about how do we do things with innovation and something differently. Today is the time to start thinking about innovation and doing something differently. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. I want to especially thank our housing partners. You know, we could not have done this without people that were willing to put together bricks and mortars to make it possible for people to have a place to live. I also want to thank our economic development partners, because without you, we would not have people working like we need to. So I want you to know that at the end of these 2 days, I hope that you'll see something that doesn't start with just where we want to end, but it's a beginning that will take us forward the next 20 years. But before we do anything further, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, the Charlotte City Council, and have them stand and be recognized. So I want you to stand, and we'll start on this row, and then we'll walk all the way over. Start on my right, and we'll start. Who's here next?
Good afternoon, Malcolm Graham, Charlotte City Council District 2, the chairman of the city's economic development committee.
Hi, everybody. Ed Drake, Charlotte City Council District 7, Chair of Transportation. My name is Bill.
All right, I want to say that if there is another council member when they're coming in, we may stop and have them introduce themselves, because there's one thing I learned. Introductions are very important, because these are the people that you voted for. These are the people that you hold accountable. These are the people that you can give information to and get feedback from. And I am Vi Lyles, and I'm proud to serve as mayor of this great city. Thank you, everyone, and I do believe we have a special occasion right now. Is that correct, Mr. Jones?
I think they beat us to the punch.
Well, you know,
The
okay.
cake, maybe it's just
It's
a
the-
song.
Oh, I think that's a good idea, but you don't want me starting it. All right, now let's see who is all right, first, Miss Mayfield, come on up in the front of the room. It's your birthday. Happy birthday. Okay, now, who's the church choir person now? I know there's some musician in this room. Fulton, are you? Who has a good voice? Oh, now you made them all afraid. I know, we are gonna sing you happy birthday. All right, ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Luana. Happy birthday to you. And with all of the celebration, we're glad to do that, but now let's get to work. I'd like to have David come back up and start us out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Lyles. I want to introduce our first presenter, Andrew Salkin from Resilient Cities Catalyst. They are a nonprofit that works with cities around the country and around the world, developing holistic solutions to truly build resilience in the face of, and he'll talk more about this, I love these terms, in the face of the shocks and stressors that growing cities like ours face. Andrew?
And can I use this? Can I use this? Is that all right? Great. I have a hard time standing still. Thank you, David. Mayor, City Council, City Manager, Mecklenburg County officials, and critical partners of the City of Charlotte. It's so great to be here. Again, my name is Andrew Salkin, and I work at a nonprofit called Resilient Cities Catalyst. I'm joined by my colleague, Paul Nelson. And we've really been asked to be here today to kind of kick off today's conversation on housing and jobs, but really take a step to the side maybe and talk about the work we've been doing in cities and how we work with cities around the country and around the world on this concept of resilience and how we think it plays into the work that you're going to be doing. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to do that and talk about how it connects to what we think is going on in Charlotte. So with that said, Resilient Cities Catalyst, as David kind of alluded to, works with cities around the world and around the city and around the country. And our work is to help cities solve the problems they're dealing with today, but really with an eye towards going into the future and solving those challenges they have in the future. So it's kind of how do you take where the resources you have today, but really get to the place you want to be. And to do that, we help and discuss with cities this notion of if you can go to the next slide. Can I go to the next? I can do that. We'll see if that works. So one of the things we talked about is cities are these complex places. In fact, one of the reasons I think many of us live in cities is because they're complex but awesome. It's where a lot of different systems come together. They intersect. They bang into each other. They create lively, dynamic, wonderful places to work, play, and live. And that's what makes cities great. But it also is something that puts cities at risk because this interconnectivity also make cities at risk of having some failure that cascades itself through. So just down the road a little bit in Atlanta, one of the cities we had worked with had a little fire a couple years ago under the interstate and part of a bridge fell. The city shut down, right? Why? Because that roadway system was critical to driving their economic engine. And to think about a small little fire causing the whole city to shut down is a real interesting thing. And one of the things we work with Atlanta to say, not just how do you recover, but how do you make sure when this kind of thing happens again, that the challenges you face are not the same and the city doesn't have to shut down because a wire caught on fire. So this idea of interconnectedness is where we get to a little bit to resilience. And one of the things we know today, and for many reasons the pandemic has brought that to the forefront, is that cities are in a state of urgency. It's an urgent time for cities, and they're looking to make this transformation. I think the mayor used the word change. Cities are facing a lot of change, and so for us, change doesn't just happen. Change is something that's deliberate, and it can be put upon you, or it can be something that you can manage and lead to the place you want to be. And we think that notion of transformation is critical. But if you're going to do this work, it's important to think about the kind of challenges that you face, because you own these challenges. Everyone in this room owns the types of challenges that the city faces every day. Those same interconnected pieces are your challenges. And we call these shocks and stresses. So shocks are things that can pop out of nowhere and really throw everything upside down, like a pandemic. Stressors, though, are those things that are existing every day that we live with. And sometimes we live with so long we forget that it's actually something we don't like, and we just accept. And sometimes those stresses pop and they become actual shocks in themselves. Things that are impacting cities today that I think are important to remember and bring into our thinking is natural disasters. This is one of those things that you can't argue isn't happening. We're seeing today a atmospheric river is pummeling California with rain and snow. They're getting more rain and snow than they've had in the entire, I think, last 2 years over the next, last 10 days and 10 days going forward. I didn't even know what an atmospheric river was before. And so here we are, we're making up new words. A couple weeks ago, there was a bomb cyclone that brought air from the Arctic all the way down past Charlotte, all the way through the United States. We're making up new words because the world is changing. So as you think about housing and jobs, as you think about the transformation of Charlotte, making sure that you're prepared and you're climate ready is something that needs to be in the forefront. In addition to the work around climate, we know there's growing inequality. And this is something that we're seeing in cities all over the country. And we know that inequality is happening because our economy is different, but the challenges that the people who live in cities are facing these challenges as well. And it's not just at the lowest rung of the economic ladder, it's happening all throughout. And to live in a city is becoming really challenging. And how do you think about the growing inequality, but equality, dealing with the equality in a way that makes it possible to live in a city and continue to ensure it's full of great people is critical and something to think about. One of the things that we spend a lot of time these days working on, because the President of the United States has offered a once-in-a-generation investment on infrastructure, is infrastructure. And what's really interesting as we do work with cities around the country is we've never thought so much about infrastructure. We haven't thought about the amount of money that's flowing through the system. And what's really critical about this is that the infrastructure is old and aging, but it's also inadequate. And so one of the challenges that I want folks to think about is not using dollars for infrastructure to just fix the potholes of the roads that were built in the 1950s, but really challenge yourself to make sure you're spending the money on laying down the foundation of the assets and infrastructure that are going to drive the economy into 2050 and beyond, right? And this is this notion of what Secretary Buttigieg calls investing not in shovel-ready projects, but shovel-worthy. So what are the worthy projects that are going to be able to be leveraged by the city of Charlotte and the community of Charlotte to really get that transformation you want? One of the things we know is that cities around the world are interconnected. And this isn't a United States thing. Cities are just connected now. And the pandemic taught us this. The financial crisis taught us this. And we know that as, in many ways, the economy of the United States goes, it will impact the city of Charlotte. So you are connected. Recognizing this and preparing for this and understanding the risks of that are critical and important. Cities around the world are growing. There are more people moving to cities for more reasons than we could ever understand. And it's a little less so in the United States, but for many, many cities in the United States, they are growing. And this is one of the opportunities that you have. In fact, you are the envy of many cities we work with. And growing cities bring with them amazing opportunities, but they also bring challenges. And there are cities and examples of cities all over the United States that didn't meet the challenge of growing, and in many ways they're failing. San Francisco, Seattle, even Atlanta. Are those the cities that they want to evolve to, where a growing city means it's only a place of the super wealthy and people that want to be in traffic jams? I don't think that's the aspiration of the kind of city I want to live in. This is something I think is important to think about as we think about cities. Finally, the last couple of years, we've really had a reckoning with centuries of structural racism. This is something I know Charlotte has already spent a lot of time thinking about and dealing with, but this is the type of work that's really critical. Understanding how policies and programs impact people that are disadvantaged, particularly Black and brown communities, is critical, and we can't continue to do the work we've done in the past if we want to expect the solutions to be different in the future. So this is hard work and different work. And then really, for us, you know, Paul and I have spent the better part of the last 10 years trying to explain to people that all this stuff is connected and that you can't think about one without thinking about the other. And the pandemic has done the best job we could ever do. And I wish it wasn't something as horrible as a pandemic to do that, but it really has shown that many of these challenges I just listed are interconnected. They're made worse or stronger by supporting each other and working with each other. And there's never been a time for integrated thinking and to make sure that thinking is forward in its approach and thinking towards the future while making sure the present is as good as it is. So this is work that we do, and this is how we work with cities. And to us, urban resilience is an approach to planning and acting. And I think the mayor, you talked about this, acting. What are the actions that you're going to take? They're going to lead to the city of Charlotte leveraging its strengths, leveraging its opportunities to be able to not only tackle the known and unknown challenges of the future, but really create a community where everybody's able to thrive, right? And so when we started talking to the city about a summit like this, Paul and I couldn't have been more excited to join you, because many of these challenges, which cities are dealing with even more so because of the pandemic, were things that you were already thinking about. And Charlotte, in many ways, is already ahead of the curve. And for us, this 2040 comprehensive plan was something that really was this great anchor and this notion of where the city is trying to go. And this vision that's here is from the 2040 plan, and it's something that I think is an aspirational vision. And one of the things I want to lay down today is this is an aspiration. You should settle for nothing less. And this is something that says that the residents, the citizens, the people that work here, play here, live here are inclusive and welcome, but are able to thrive. Now, the answer for Charlotte and what that means is an answer for Charlotte. And I think that's a lot about what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of days. But this is a vision that I think you should hold to. And what's great about the 2040 comprehensive plans is it starts to try to take this vision and talk about how you're going to get there. And it lays out guiding principles. I love these guiding principles. Things must be equitable, authentic, integrated, and of course resilient, right? And there's a vision that's laid out that hits upon key components that need to be upgraded, matured, evolved in order to reach this goal. But then it goes a step further, which is really important. So it's not just talk and it's not just vision. It talks about goals, real work that's going to happen. This is one of the things that I think is important to realize. As you go from vision and goals, as you get to goals, you start chunking things up into sectors. So now we're getting into sectors and the type of work that's going to have to happen in order to make the change that you see and you seek actually hit the vision that you want. And these are the goals, the 10 goals. And I just want to kind of touch this for a second. We're talking a little bit about 3 and number 8. And I put up these lines on purpose because it's important that you don't just focus on 3 and 8, because if you're not careful, you're just going to focus on all 10 and they're going to be their own little box, and you're going to have a really nice, healthy community, but maybe not the type of housing you want for your community. You're going to have a nice housing for your community, but you're not going to have a way to get to the job for your community. So don't fall into the traps of just doing one thing. Your assignment for the 2040 plan and your assignment to become resilient is doing it all. And so the question is, what's the transformation that's going to be needed? Sitting below the vision, the work that you're going to be doing, how we're all going to change how we show up every day and the work we do and the inspiration we give each other. How's that work going to change to really create the vision that you're holding yourselves accountable? Now, to take a step back from Charlotte for a second and just ask where cities are today, I don't know, this hit me because I was just reading the papers before Christmas. Some cities are starting to really grapple with this notion of the pandemic and what has happened because of the pandemic. And I think we're going to start seeing this a lot more as cities are saying, wow, we survived, or at least we've evolved to wherever the pandemic is today, and now it's just a triple-demic. But we have real problems that we're starting to see. This is a picture from an article in the New York Times of downtown San Francisco. And they're asking the question is, what happens to a city when the way that people work and use your city change, right? And this is a questions that New York City was asking, and they came out with a plan just before Christmas called the New New York. And they said it took a crisis for us to realize we had a crisis. And the crisis was the pandemic, but the crisis they didn't know they had is that they didn't realize that some of the anchor components that New York had, strong economic base with lots of good paying jobs that seem to work for folks with transportation, it turns out that those are actually not as strong as they thought. So the city, for the first time since I've lived in New York City, which is where I live, the mayor and the governor got together on a stage and they said, we're in crisis and we need to take action. And the reason I thought it was worth putting this up here, the 3 things they said they need to do, sound a lot like what you have in the 2040 plan. 1, neighborhoods, communities where people work, play, and live have to be awesome, right? That's number 1. 2, it has to be easy to get around. You can't get around if you're stuck in traffic, if it's too hard to get on a train and get there. It has to be easy to get to and from work. It has to be easy to have access to opportunities that you seek. And 3, you have to have growth, but it can't just be any type of growth. It has to be inclusive growth that's focused on the future. And for New York City, they got to change their economy and the jobs that are there so people are acting differently. What's really interesting about this is, again, these are just 3 bullets. But what the city is doing below it will determine whether or not they truly succeed at achieving this vision. And so, again, I want to say, like, what's happening below the bullets is what matters, because that's what everyone here in this room does. Whether you're a council member, whether you're a staff for the city, whether you're working a nonprofit, whether you're a community member, it's how we show up differently that will lead to change. Because if we do things the same way and we expect change, then maybe we're going to be waiting a long time. One of the things I thought was really interesting about this plan is for the first time I saw a city not just talk about affordable housing, but they talked about housing. And New York City put out a moonshot that says they've consistently underinvested in housing, and that underinvesting in housing has created a failure in the housing market that makes it a burden for everyone to be there. It just costs too much to be in New York City. And they put out a moonshot to say they want to build 500,000 new homes. Now, that's an amazing number. And for anyone here who's ever been part of owning a home, buying a home, renting a home, this is not easy to do. So if you can imagine what has to happen behind the scenes on zoning, permitting, partnering, financing, it's astronomical. But these are the type of challenges that cities like New York and San Francisco, who are in crisis, are doing. So this is kind of some thoughts around where cities are, but bringing it back to Charlotte and asking about today, housing and jobs. The 2040 plan, you know, we have the overall vision, but within here, the plan calls for, makes some pretty big statements. We know from the plan that there's going to be new people living here, 385,000 plus new residents, 212,000 new jobs. I will tell you this is the envy. The idea that you have opportunity to grow and the growth comes with new people and new jobs, that's an opportunity. But the opportunity is dangerous because it can't just happen, because it will. As I was told, nothing's going to stop this from happening. The question is, does it happen in the way that you want it to happen? And so one question on the housing front is, how do you create the housing units to support not just the people that are moving here, but really ensure that you're supporting the people that are here? How do you create jobs? And this is a quote from Hire Charlotte. How do you make sure the jobs that you're bringing in are for the right types of jobs for the people that are here, the jobs and the skill sets that are the people here, while also attracting new people to come? Doesn't happen by accident. It happens with deliberate, consistent work over time. And finally, the infrastructure that supports this, that connects all the jobs and housing together, is critical. Transportation being one of the ones that is most critical, but it goes along with the other infrastructure that's needed to support new people living here and new infrastructure. So in closing, what I want you to know is, again, you have this amazing opportunity. And one of the things I spend a lot of time when I talk to city officials, and particularly mayors, is you have resources. And I chunk up the resources into 3 groups. And it's important as you think about this discussion. There's your money, there's your assets, and then there's your partnerships. I sometimes call that other people's money, right? But to think about this is really important. And the mayor said this before. She said, you have $50 million investing in the housing fund. How do you leverage that? I want to go a step further, Mayor. I want to say the city budget plus the county budget's $5+ billion a year. 20 years of this plan, that's $100 billion. And if you say to me at the end of 20 years, you got $100 billion worth of value, I'd say you failed. Because the question is, how do you leverage that to get $1 trillion worth of value? And the way you get there is by thinking strategically about your resources and thinking about your partners, because the partners are the ones who you're going to leverage. They're the citizens, they're the businesses, they're the developers, they're the nonprofits. So thinking about that is one thing I want to leave you with. The other piece is, how do you leverage your government assets to get that to change? And then on the partnership front, this is something that, I don't know, having been a longtime government official, it's like, how do I show up and partner? Well, I show up because I'm regulating you. So, you know, government does show up. Sometimes it's a handshake, but often it's done through thoughtful policy. So how does thoughtful policy achieve the vision laid out in the 2040 plan? And how does appropriate and clear regulation inspire people to make investments in your community, not so they make money, but so they're helping you create the communities that you have already said you want? And finally, you guys have some of the best nonprofit and philanthropic communities that any city has. They have to be at the table. They have to be part of the partnerships, supporting communities and nonprofits to do daring things and take first risk, helping the philanthropic community know where those investments and their resources can best be used is something that also has to be there. And thinking about this package as all together opens up all kinds of opportunities to really get to the goals you have for housing and jobs. That will be the anchor of achieving a vision where everyone's able to thrive, even those that live here and even those that are going to live here don't even know they want to live here yet. So this is what I wanted to leave you with. This is the start of a conversation. This is a little bit about how we think about cities, but I want to say we're here to be partners. We want to hold you accountable to your vision, and we want to try to figure out any idea you have. Let's figure out how to do it and make sure it gets done, but make sure it gets done at the scale and in the scope that you all think is important in order for you to truly recognize who you want to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. To me, the couple of key takeaways, this notion about being thoughtful and intentional about what we choose to do, and just as importantly, what we choose not to do to make room to do the things that we choose to do. So Andrew, thank you. Thank you a lot. All right, next up, we have a couple of data-driven presentations around housing and jobs. The first is from Dr. Yong Chu, who is the director of the Childers Klein Real Estate Center at UNC Charlotte. So Dr. Chu, come on down.
Mayor Lyers, council members, and distinguished guests, thanks for having me here. So what I'm going to present is really part of the State of Charlotte Housing Report the Childers Klein Center for Real Estate has been doing for 4 years now. So this is actually part of the report I presented last November. Okay, so I'm first going to give you a macroeconomic overview that's most relevant to the housing market, so demand and supply conditions in the Charlotte region. So for this, we draw data from the census. So we're going to use the census data. You can see here, so the census data, the most recent is 2021. You will see that we do not have data for 2020 because COVID messed everything up. So the census did not have any data in that year as well. So first one I'm going to show you is the population growth. So everybody heard about the population growth that's been going on in Charlotte about every day, about 100 people moving to the city. So this will show you this is true. This is happening, and the population has been growing. And of course, you also heard a lot of story about like population growing during the COVID period. So yes, it's growing, but as you can see, the population growth rate is actually a little bit slower than previous years. So a lot of this was driven actually by international migration, because COVID pretty much disrupt most of the international flows. The domestic is still there. So this shows us that the demand will be strong. Demand for housing in the Charlotte area will be strong. So the other thing to look at is probably more relevant to housing demand is number of households. Okay, so you would say, okay, it's probably going to be similar as population. Yes and no. The no part comes again in the 2021, where during the COVID period, we see that population growth rate actually was lower, but the growth rate for the number of households in this region is actually very high, because the average household size actually decreased pretty significantly during the COVID period. So we have a lot more households living in the region. By the way, these are all based on the Charlotte Metro MSA area. So now this is the demand side. So we have more people, we have more households. Obviously, they will need more housing units. So this is the housing units that in the Charlotte region. So as you can see, we are doing relatively good in 2018, 2019. We had pretty good growth rate in terms of number of housing units, but 2021, the growth rate actually significantly decreased. So everybody understand what's the driving forces. So there's COVID, there's labor shortage, building material shortage, costs skyrocketed, and then all of a sudden the supply side actually became very, very limited. So the other thing to look at the same problem is to look at the changes in the number of households and the changes in the number of housing units. So if we want to house all the people that move into this area, we need to build at least the same number of housing units as the increase in the number of households in this region. So, but I plot this starting from 2014, but there has been an underbuilding problem since the Great Recession. For whatever reason, the number of housing units built every year is significantly less than the number of households that are moving into this area since since after the Great Recession. So, and then the region started to catch up in 2018 and 2019. Okay, so here in 2018 and 2019, you can see that we built more than the increase in the number of households during those 2 years. However, it stopped in 2020, 2021. So the last bar is the change from 2019 to 2021. So those are 2-year increases in number of households and number of housing units. Okay, so if you look at those numbers, these 2 years created a shortage. These 2 years alone created a shortage of 10,000 housing units. Right? So if we want to catch that up, it's not like we just build another 10,000 housing units next year. We need to build 10,000 extra housing units to be able to fix that. And we have not actually fixed all the shortages that in the previous year yet. Okay? So the takeaway here is that we just need to build more houses to be able to accommodate the strong demand in this area, unless you want to suppress demand. Right? So as a result, the vacancy rate actually significantly dropped in 2021, okay, to less than 8%. So this is kind of gives you a overview of the supply and demand situations for housing in the Charlotte region. Now next, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to look at the housing market in the area. So here, what we are going to do is we are going to look at the core part of the metro, of the MSA. We are going to be focusing on Mecklenburg County and 7 counties neighboring the Mecklenburg County. And I also want to say this data, this micro data comes from the Canopy Realtors Association. So here what I'm plotting is the house price. Okay, so this is like the COVID era house price dynamics starting from January 2020 to September 2022. So I'm plotting both the Charlotte region and the Mecklenburg County. So as you can see, the house price has increased very dramatically. And if you look at the number, if we just think about the COVID era, January 2020 to September 2022, median house price in this region increased 54%. Okay, so this is the kind of growth rate we kind of never saw, even during the booming years of early 2000. Right? And from September 2021 to September 2022, the growth rate was 14.2. And from September 2020 to September 2021 is 16.3. So of course, these are COVID period. So nowadays we are seeing like it's slowing down. Okay, prices start to be a little bit flat. Okay, not increasing as crazy. However, this is very significant, as later I will show you how that's going to impact affordability, not surprisingly. So the craziness of this market can also be seen from this chart, which is the median days on the market. That is the number of days between you list your house until it's under contract. Okay, so I plotted starting from January 2020, that was already very low. Compared to historical numbers, it was 20-something days. I mean, in the middle of the COVID era, the median days on the market was 3 days. Right? So you list the house, 3 days, it's under contract. Okay, so for the sellers, it's really good. Think about for the buyers. Right? First of all, you just need to look at the listings all the time. Otherwise, it's gone. Second of all, you only got 3 days to make a decision to buy a house. You're probably going to live there for the next 10, 20 years. Chances are, because of the market condition, you're not going to be able to buy like the ideal houses you want to live in. Okay, so that's not good. So, but of course, we are seeing this number going up, like at the end of last year, right? So it's softening, but it's still way below the 20 days that we observed in January, and of course way below the historical norms. And the other thing that's very crazy is the number of houses that are sold above listing prices. Right? So again, in January, it's way below 20%. January 2020, it was way below 20%. In the middle of the COVID period, it was more than 60%. More than 60% parcels were sold above listing prices. The number's coming down, but not there yet. Okay? So all these is because of the demand became really, really strong. People want to live in Charlotte, want to buy houses in Charlotte, but the supply is very low, right? So now let me talk about the other thing. We know the house prices are high. Now let's look at the distribution, right? So traditionally, when we talk about, let's say, entry-level houses, you would think the entry-level houses should be sold less than $150,000, right? So this is the distribution for all houses sold in 2022. And let me tell you, only 3.8% of houses are sold under $150,000. And only about 25% of houses were sold under $300,000. Right? So that puts affordability a significant problem. And now the other thing that doesn't help affordability is the rise in interest rates. Right? So at the start of the COVID, we were looking at interest rates 2.5 to 3%. And at September, when we did the report, the interest rate was like 7% on a typical mortgage. Okay, so now think about, like, if you want to buy, let's say, a medium-priced house. Okay, so in 2018, you need to make about $76,000 to buy a medium-priced house in Charlotte. In 2022, you need $137,000. Okay, so now you think, okay, I can go down a little bit, so I'm going to buy, let's say, 10th percentile price. Okay, so this is 10% of the price cut, so only 10% of houses are sold under that price in the Charlotte area. In 2022, you still need to make $83,000 to be able to afford a house that is priced at the 10th percentile. How many households can afford that? 50% of households in this region cannot afford that 10th percentile price. Right? 80% cannot afford a medium-priced house in this region. So that's the affordability problem. Right? So usually I do not make any policy recommendations, but why this is the case, why affordability is becoming a problem. Again, it's because the supply side. Of course, demand side is contributing because there's very strong demand. But the real problem is the supply side is not able to catch up with the demand side. Okay? In one sentence, we just need more houses in this region. All right? So now let me talk a little bit about the rental markets. So you may ask, okay, buying a house is very expensive. How about renting? It's very similar. Right? So this is the effective rent per unit in the Charlotte region, or the effective rent per square foot. Okay? As you can see, starting from the COVID era, starting from 2020, the rents also increased dramatically. Right? And actually, the dynamics has changed completely because there was not much going on before 2010 and very modest growth since 2010, but this COVID era made things a lot worse. So this is the other data if you want to think about. So that was the apartment rents. This is single family rental. Very similar dynamics. There's just and also because in the area will push more people into the rental market, right? So that will make things a lot harder as well. Okay. So the last part, I want to talk about how does Charlotte compare to other cities? Are we the worst or are we still okay? So let's first look at the house prices. So this is, again, because we need to compare across different cities, and we only have macro data for Charlotte. So we go back to the census data. So we are going to compare Charlotte with a set of what we call the regional competitive cities: Asheville, Charleston, Columbia, Greensboro, Raleigh, Richmond, and Spartanburg, right? So Charlotte is the third. So if you just look at absolute house price, it's relatively okay. So not the highest. So Raleigh had the highest price, okay? But if you look at the growth rate, Charlotte had the highest growth rate from 2019 to 2021. It's 2 digits. So these numbers are slightly different than the number we get from the microdata, because this is based on the census survey, okay? But this is something concerning. The house prices in Charlotte are increasing at a much faster rate than most other regional competitive cities. So we also compare Charlotte with a set of national competitive cities. So Atlanta, Austin, Cincinnati, Denver, Indianapolis, Memphis, Nashville, and so on. Here, of course, we see many other cities have like relatively higher growth rate, but Charlotte still has one of the highest growth rate among those cities, right? Only Austin, and I think that one's Memphis, and then Tampa had slightly higher growth rates of house prices. Okay? Now the next thing I want to show you is this thing called a median multiple, which was defined as the median house price divided by median income in this area. Okay? And traditionally what we think is if this multiple is below 3, this is houses are very affordable in this region. Okay, between 3 and 4, it becomes a problem. If it's above 4, it's very, very unaffordable, right? So, and 2021, so this is based on 2021. 2021 was the first year Charlotte crossed that threshold of 4, right? So you can say, okay, it's still kind of okay compared to other cities, but it's already there, right? So the affordability surely become a problem, right? And so even if you compare the national competitive cities, of course, Charlotte is not the worst, but we are getting there, right? So we probably need to do things relatively quickly to try to resolve this problem. Yeah, so again, it's very simple. It's demand and supply. However you do it, it's demand and supply, right? My guess is the demand for housing in the Charlotte area will remain strong. Okay, so the only solution is, or what we can only do is how to increase supply. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you with that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chu. Something you said earlier in the presentation, though, that I think kind of hangs there at the end. We could suppress demand, right? I mean, this doesn't have to go one way. Now, we probably don't want to, but that's a potential outcome, right? That is a potential outcome that we don't want. But what I have found in our innovation work is a lot of times organizations focus on what they want. But sometimes you can get clarity by thinking about what you don't want. And we don't want to suppress demand for housing, because what that means is a bunch of other bad stuff has happened. So thinking about what we don't want can be really important. Now, the other takeaway from me is as I was watching your presentations, you can't separate housing from economics. If you want to talk in economics, then you got to talk about jobs. So fortunately for us, we have an economist to talk about the state of jobs. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Laura Ulrich, who's a senior regional economist with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. Dr. Ulrich?
Yep, I'm going to do the same. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I am with the Richmond Fed, but I'm a part of the Charlotte branch, and I'm the senior regional economist for North and South Carolina. So I'm based here in Charlotte for those of you who I haven't yet met. I'm going to talk about jobs. I have a lot of data, as the Fed always does, but I'll try to get through it in 20 minutes. Since I work for the Fed, I always get to remind you that the views that I'm going to express are mine alone and don't represent an official position of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond or the Federal Reserve System. So where are we now? So, you know, I feel like everything's just been an absolute whirlwind. We all feel that way. But if you take a step back and think about the past couple of years, 2021 was a year of pretty extraordinary economic growth in terms of jobs and also in terms of GDP. The economy grew relatively fast. 2022 was much bumpier in terms of GDP growth, but employment growth remained strong, which is one of the reasons why economists like myself have been saying we're not in a recession, is because employment growth has been so strong. Our region has fared better than much of the other parts of the country. And, you know, I bolded and underlined here because this is important and it follows directly from what we just heard about housing. We continue to be an importer of people, companies, and talent. And that is what makes us the envy of many other cities, because if you look at, 24 states last year had more deaths than they had births. 24 states. North Carolina was one of the ones that did not. And if you look at Charlotte and Raleigh, we're having both natural growth, so more births than deaths, and people moving in, which is a really good place to be. But this brings with it challenges, and we'll talk about this today. One of which is labor shortages, and we're seeing this, and I'll show you some of that data. And then I'll point out, too, that wages have increased significantly, but for most workers, wages have not increased as fast as inflation has increased. And so for most people, their real wage growth is negative. So they feel as though, and just literally, they can't consume the same amount of goods and services as they could previously. So this slide is a little off. I don't know who's controlling the slides, but if you do the full screen view or can scroll down a little bit, I don't know. I'll just talk through it until it gets fixed. Hopefully it will. So we are now above, this is employment growth. Yeah, I think if you switch to full screen view, it'll fix itself. Yeah, you're fine. So we are back to where we were pre-COVID, but if you look at the trajectory of job growth nationally, we are not back to, yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. We are not back to the same trajectory. So if I drew that line from February 2020, we would be at a higher rate of growth than we are now. But I will point out, and we got the jobs report yesterday, and we still are, on Friday for December, and we added another 200,000 plus jobs to keep up with just kind of normal churn. If the economy was kind of flat, we would expect to add about 80 to 100,000 jobs a month. So, 200,000, 300,000, 500,000, these are really large months of job growth that we've seen. And in the Charlotte market, things are really different. We are far above where we would have predicted pre-COVID. So you can see the significant loss of jobs in 2020, but you'll also see that while nationally, we just recovered to pre-COVID employment just a couple months ago. We've long been above that level in the Charlotte region. And so this is the footprint of our Fed, which is the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. It covers the Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, D.C. And I like to show this graph when I'm presenting the Carolinas to give you a little bit of context, because the 5th district is one of the fastest growing districts in the country. but North Carolina and South Carolina are far outperforming the other parts of our district. So there's somebody that has my job that covers these other states, and the conversations they have in their states are much different than the ones I have because I cover the top two there. So North Carolina and South Carolina, which have grown relatively fast. So this indexes employment to February 2020 and shows the percentage of jobs that were lost and where we are. You know, I think sometimes it's important to just kind of pause for just a second and think about what happened in March and April 2020. I mean, look at this. Depending on where you were, somewhere between about 12% and 15% of jobs just disappeared. I mean, it's an economic shock like we've never seen in our history, right? And so to think about that by the time we got to about August 2021, so just a little over a year later, we were back to pre-COVID employment in North Carolina. That's pretty amazing. But this is kind of hard to adjust to because I'm telling you that we now have more jobs and more people working than we did pre-COVID, but we still have labor shortages. Right? So what the heck is going on? Why are there more jobs now, but still if I pull up to a Starbucks at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the door might be shut, right? Or I went to a really large retailer last night to get my sons a notebook for school, and there were no notebooks on the shelves. So I asked, and they said, oh, we have them. We just don't have anybody to stock them right now. Like, what's going on? We can look at the data and see some of these shifts, and I'm going to show you that in a minute, but I want to recognize that paradox. This, and I think you'll get a copy of these slides in the materials you'll be able to see this better, but let me just tell you what this shows. This shows every MSA in North and South Carolina, so every metropolitan area. The bigger the MSA, the bigger the bubble. The blue are South Carolina, the pink or purple is North Carolina. And this shows 1 year employment growth on the x-axis, 10-year on the y-axis. And so the strongest growing MSAs are in the upper right-hand quadrant. And those three bubbles are Raleigh, Charlotte, and Charleston, South Carolina. Those three metro areas have grown extraordinarily quickly in terms of job growth, both over the last year, but from a 10-year perspective. But I'll point out here that in the bottom left-hand quadrant, that would be negative employment growth, both short-term and long-term. In the Carolinas, there's only one MSA that falls into that quadrant, and that's Rocky Mount in eastern North Carolina. If you were to put a lot of other states up here, you would see many more metros in this bottom left-hand quadrant. Why is this key? Well, if you are a metro area that's facing short-term or long-term employment loss, short or long-term population loss, you're also facing a shrinking tax base, right? And so the conversations like you guys are having today are much different than if you're not in that quadrant. And this is unique kind of to the Carolinas. One thing I'll point out too is that this hasn't always been the story in this area because of what caused the Great Recession and how it was structured. North Carolina and Charlotte were hit really hard by the Great Recession, and we recovered slower. If you go back and look at that 2009-2010 period, the growth rate in employment was lower than North Carolina as a whole, which was lower than the United States as a whole. This time has been much different, and you can see Mecklenburg County really beginning in about 2011 has been an outperformer and has continued to be so throughout the COVID pandemic period. So here is a bit of what explains this paradox about jobs right now. This is North Carolina employment change from February 2020 to November 2022. There are now just 2 sectors in the state of North Carolina that have negative employment growth. Government, and by the way, those are state and local government jobs, not federal government jobs. You can talk to a lot of you in the room that work in state and local government, and you've seen this happen, but people have left. I could show you more data that show that wage increases have not kept up. Those government jobs have not kept up with the private sector. That's part of it. Part of it is people have left jobs in education, in social work, in some other fields. And they've moved over into these other jobs. So yes, we've lost 12,400 government jobs. Also, we've only added 1,900 leisure and hospitality workers in a state that's added about 250,000 people during this period of time. So we need more than that to be fully staffed in those industries. But look at how many jobs have been added in professional and business services. This includes everything from law offices to architectural firms to accounting firms, all sorts of different business, kind of professional and businesses. There has been a massive shift in how and where people work. And if you look at the subsector data, if you dig in here, what you'll see is that people have left difficult, stressful jobs that typically don't pay a whole lot for jobs where they can make the same money or more that are less stressful. That's a lot of what's going on. If you look at, everybody in this room knows people who've left public education, unfortunately, as teachers, and a lot of them are working in business and professional services now. There's been this shift where maybe before I worked in fast food, but now I can get a job in transportation and warehousing and work in a warehouse and have maybe more consistent hours. Maybe I can listen to whatever music I want to listen to the whole time, and I don't interact with a single person, which is a lot different than working a drive-through, right? So a lot of this is a change in how and where people work. And quite frankly, it's a movement from where people are in jobs where you see them to jobs where you do not see them. You see people at your Starbucks, you don't see them if they're working in a warehouse. And so that's how we have this interesting world where we have more people working, but it seems like we have fewer people. The most common question I get asked is, where are all the workers? And the answer is they're working. People do not like that answer at all, because then that presents a problem, right? If most people, and there are people who've left labor force, I'm gonna talk about that, but if most people who were working in February 2020 are working, then we have to get more creative about how we grow our labor force going forward. This is Charlotte. In Charlotte, only government is negative and just by 300 jobs, and you can see trade, transportation, utilities leads the way. So this is a bit of a sector shift as well. Some of the sectors have kind of lost proportionally their share of employees, and some have gained pretty significantly. So the recovery does look a little less impressive in terms of employment if we look at labor force participation. And some of you in this room have seen me present this many times before, but I always go back to the post-World War II era because to give you a context. So labor force participation rate is the percentage of adults that could be working, that are working or actively looking for work. And this rate increased a ton from the 60s to really the 90s due to two things. Number one, baby boomers moving from being a generation of children to a generation of adults, and then also women entering the labor force. But this rate has been falling since around 2000, and it's been falling for a myriad of reasons, primarily because of the aging of America, or sometimes you will hear it called the graying of America, people living longer and having longer periods of retirement. But there also have been other groups of people who have been reducing their labor force participation rates. And if we look at who's left the labor force, so this is by age and education. So the top upper left is prime age workers, so these are age 25 to 54. That rate has declined. This is a key group because a very high percentage of them typically work. You'll see on the axis, if you can see it, the axis goes from 80 to 83%. So we've lost a pretty sizable number of prime age workers. On the right-hand side is age 55 plus, and really the significant loss in workers is over age 65. We cannot do much about that. Right? And I don't think we want to, kind of as a society, discourage people from successfully retiring at some point, right? Everybody in this room hopes to do that eventually, I would think. And so there's not much we can do about aging. There's probably more we can do about these prime age workers. And then on the bottom, a lot of times I'll hear people say like, oh, some people aren't working more, those people aren't working anymore. And I feel like oftentimes they're talking about certain groups, like maybe people that aren't as highly educated as they are. But the data actually show that those without a high school diploma do have low labor force participation rates, but they're just kind of consistently bad. And so we should work very hard on that, but we haven't seen much of a change through COVID with those without a high school degree. But the two I have here on the left, on the bottom, is college grads. So that has fallen pretty significantly since the beginning of COVID. And then high school grad, no college, has fallen pretty significantly. This shows it as well. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I wanted to include this in the slide deck. If I had more time, I would go through it more. But this breaks it down by age and race and gender. And one thing I want to point out is that actually black male labor force participation rate is up pretty significantly. And actually the gap between black male and white male labor force participation rate is about as narrow as it's ever been in history. And so you'll see as you look through these numbers, a lot of the people in the prime age specifically that have left that labor force are white males and white females. And this is for different reasons. I was part of the South Carolina Labor Force Participation Task Force that they put together, and we did a big survey using government data of people that were working in 2019 that aren't now. And not surprisingly for women, we found childcare was one of the primary issues. For men, childcare was not on the top 5 list, but criminal backgrounds were. And so there's, it differs based on age and gender and things like that. But there are reasons we know people stay out of the labor force that I think we can address. The job openings rate, quits rate, hires rate have been highly elevated. They are normalizing, but they still remain pretty far above where we were before COVID. So tons of job postings, lots of people leaving their jobs. And when people leave their jobs, that tells us they have a lot of confidence in what's going on, right? People tend not to leave a job if they're afraid they can't get another one, right? Or if they're afraid it's going to be kind of last in, first out at their new place of employment. So with this, wages are up. And they're up a lot, right? I mean, low skill wages are up year over year, 6.7%. But as I mentioned, inflation was higher. So it's great that wages are up, but it did not keep up with inflation overall. Now, for certain jobs, it did. The highest in demand, some of the lowest skill jobs, highest in demand. If you were to look at CNAs in nursing homes, for example, that probably did keep up with inflation. But on average, it did not. One thing I will point out here, though, is that high and mid-skill occupation wages have been growing slower than lower skill wages. And that is not typical. This is really good in a sense because of the issues we have with income inequality. So this is a positive. So where do we go from here? I think there's a lot of things we can do to impact the availability of workers in the labor force, but I think we have to acknowledge that most of the workers are working. So what does that mean? That means we have to think about how to engage those who want to work but are not a part of the labor force, and many of those people face structural barriers that we've known about for a long time that have just gotten worse during the COVID period. So I think flexibility is huge. If you don't know what people pay for childcare nowadays, ask somebody at your table and you might file it on the floor if you're not subject to that any longer. It has gotten much more expensive in the past few years, and so flexibility for people with children in terms of where they work, how they work, what hours they work is important. Immigration, I think, has to be a part of the conversation. There are policy initiatives that could improve outcomes, so things like enhanced child tax credits, expanding the Pell Grant, things like that. And then changes in recruiting philosophies for the businesses in the room, thinking about, do people really need a college degree for X job? Could we engage 3 retired workers to work just 10 hours a week instead of 1 full-time person? There's a lot of retired people that would like to work some, they just don't want to go to a lot of meetings typically. And then I come from an education background, and so I'm always going to focus on education. That's kind of my natural draw. But we have to find ways to get youth. The youth, it's great that we're importing talent, but we also have a lot of local talent that are not engaged in the ways they need to be engaged. So how do we get the youth engaged in these high demand fields? There are certain fields, nursing, computer science, accounting, data analytics, you could go on, that are in higher demand than ever right now. And oftentimes, there are also fields where there's a short supply. There's not a whole lot of people trying to go into a lot of these fields. And in our higher ed institutions, some of them, enrollment's falling in these fields. So how do we get youth into the pipeline, I think, to create more of a higher supply of labor is a really important part of the conversation, too. So I will stop there.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ulrich. All right, next up, a presentation of the Housing and Jobs Survey results from the Charlotte area. We've got Tracy Dodson, who is Assistant City Manager and the Director of the Economic Development Director, and Sean Heath, who is the Director of Housing and Neighborhood Services. Come on up.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to report we've only got 3 slides here. Last month, as part of the planning process for the summit, we thought, wouldn't it be useful or informative if we could release a survey to the general public? So we did just that, and by way of introduction, I would share with you that we released the survey on December 13th, and we just closed it a few days ago on January 4th, which you might think is not the ideal time of year to have a survey. It was a little bit challenging, but thanks to our marketing and comms teams, a lot of work was done to push the survey through various channels to try and get the word out to the best extent that we could. I would underscore here, maybe the most important takeaway before we start sharing some of the specific results is we would acknowledge this is not a representative sample of the general population of Charlotte. What we are sharing with you is not intended to be presented as fully representative of all stakeholders in our community. But we wanted to give folks an opportunity to weigh in, and 250 individuals did just that. So we wanted to share those results with you this evening. Just a quick breakdown in terms of the demographics. There was a good amount of diversity across the age continuum, folks between mid-20s and mid-60s that completed the survey. On gender, we skewed a little heavy on female relative to the general population in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. On education, we skewed very heavily towards college graduates relative to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg population. And on rent or own residences, we skewed a little bit towards owners relative to the general population. So just to give you a sense for, generically speaking, who the individuals were that completed the survey, some of which I assume are here in the room this evening. The survey essentially had 2 components, one focused on housing and the other on jobs. And in both instances, we asked the survey respondents to rank order areas of potential focus. So for housing, we identified 10 general categories of interest. I would not suggest to you that these 10 categories cover every single community-based housing issue that you would find if we walked out the door and polled 100 people on the street. But we thought it was a good representation of the types of issues and challenges and opportunities that City Council has been grappling with over the last 12 months or so. So as I said, in each instance, we were asking the respondents to rank order the 10 categories from 1 to 10, with 1 representing the most important focus area and 10 representing the least important focus area. So for this particular survey, a low score is a better score. So you can imagine if all 250 participants thought the same thing in terms of what the highest priority is, that focus area would have had an average rank score of 1.0. If every single respondent felt the same way about the least important category, that would have scored a 10.0. That didn't happen. So what we've done here is we've listed these out in rank order, and I won't go through each one of them in detail, but I just wanted to share a few highlights. So at the top of the list was support the production and or preservation of affordable housing units. I don't think we were surprised that rated high or rated at the top. I think there's been a very consistent drumbeat in the community over the last 6 or 7 years regarding the shortage of affordable housing. I think we've already heard and seen some of the data on that here this evening. The second item on the list, reduce the unsheltered homeless population. Personally, that was noteworthy to see that one near the top of the list. I'm not sure if that would surprise anyone in the room. I think with this particular one, of course, it's a very observable issue in the community, and I think with some of the challenges we've had related to encampments over the last couple of years during COVID, it's the sort of community concern that could certainly be front and center for folks. Moving here to the third item, reduce the unstably housed population, just giving some examples here in terms of severely cost-burdened residents and or long-term hotel residents who are really relying on hotels as housing of last resort. We know there are great challenges in this community associated with unstably housed individuals. While they may not be homeless, they're really kind of teetering on that brink of being homeless. Last year, the report that was issued as the strategic framework for the Home for All work indicated that there were roughly 50,000 individuals in Mecklenburg County that are severely cost burdened. So with severely cost burdened, the basic metric would be that they're devoting 50% or more of their household income to housing-related expenses. So you can see that's a very tenuous situation to be in. If you were to consider individuals that were cost burdened, then that number would go from 50,000 to 100,000. It would grow fairly rapidly. So it wasn't really surprising to see that rated pretty high. The fourth item here on the list, reference to accelerating the creation of good-paying jobs in low opportunity areas. I know that wouldn't be considered as a pure housing kind of a focus area, but this summit is called the Housing and Jobs Summit for a reason. City priorities obviously don't and shouldn't live in silos. So we wanted the housing survey to have a few direct references to things other than bricks and sticks. And one of the things that I think participants in the survey would agree with is that when you're looking at opportunities to address the affordable housing challenge, yes, but bringing more supply into the marketplace is clearly important, but so too are the potential investments we can make in the households themselves. How can we help equip individuals to grow in the economic mobility space? I won't go down through each one of these one by one, but I think what will be interesting for us as we kind of continue in our community outreach around housing will be to test some of the assumptions that are embedded in this. As I said, I wouldn't suggest to you that this is the definitive view of a representative sample of Charlotteans, but it was an interesting way to kind of test some of our ideas from the staff level. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tracy to share some perspective on the housing aspect of the survey, or I'm sorry, on the jobs aspect.
Thanks, Sean. And I think I'm the last thing that is standing between you all and a break. So I will try to make this relatively quick. With the job survey component of this, what we really wanted to focus on and start from is testing out our Hire Charlotte initiative that we worked on last year with many of you in the room about how to line the ecosystem and the jobs that we're creating, we're training for, and we're recruiting here to our city. And so it was really about reaffirming, are we in the right direction? Are we moving in the right direction? But it also gets at some of the interconnectedness that Andrea was talking about. And it did align quite a bit with the Hire Charlotte initiative. The most important thing that you'll see from the first, I think, top three is we are in a skills-based economy. And so references to upskilling, reskilling, and developing those soft skills are really important. And the other piece is the connectivity to the employers. How are we connecting the jobs that we're training for and recruiting for to the people in our community? The other point that I think is really important, and I know that Sean had a little bit of this in the housing slide, is that barriers to employment. And we haven't focused as much on that, I think, with Hire Charlotte as we have in our Corridors of Opportunity initiative, where it's one thing if you're building a sidewalk or you're putting a job in the corridor, but if there's barriers, we're not really helping anybody. And we have to think holistically about how we're approaching that. And so while it didn't score the highest, it was good to see that was reaffirmed as well. And then the last thing that I will point out, kind of reiterating a little bit of what Andrew said, the jobs for tomorrow. We're really thinking about not only what are our needs right now, but where are we going? And I'm really excited that Gerard's here tonight, and we have the Pearl as a case study tomorrow to talk about, because I think it connects really well with where we're trying to go and not just answer the problems of right now and today. And I think with that is about it. You want to come back up?
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And I think the mayor has something to share before I give you instructions before our break.
Okay.
Yes?
Yes. Thank you. I just wanted to say that I said when we were starting out that seeing people who serve you are very, very important. And we've had some other members of the council join us, and I'd like to ask the Mayor Pro Tem to stand up and say hello, and then we'll move to the next two people in this room. I think you have to say your name if you don't want me to say it. I'm glad to say it, but you should say your names. You have to talk louder than that, Dante. All right, thank you. Is there anyone else? Is there another elected official that has been able to join us? Oh, there you are. Here we are. I just asked Marcus. He did not see your lovely gold jacket. And that's a Johnson C. Smith Golden Bull jacket, we know. Okay.
I am Marjorie Molina. I'm the representative for District 5.
These folks work really hard, the time that they put in and the thinking and the listening that they have to do. So let's give everybody a round of applause. And then, David, tell us how to get these things done.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, so I have very specific instructions. Maybe. We have boxed meals out here, and Julie, I'm looking for you out here, right? Feel free to grab. We're going to restart at 5:45. That's 5:45 Eastern, to be really, really specific. We're going to start, not roll in, start at 5:45. So please grab your meal, grab water, grab snacks, restrooms. You know the drill. Also, our earlier speakers are going to hang back. So if you have a question or a comment or something you want to share with them or pick their brain during this break, they're going to hang out a little bit, give you a little bit more of their time. So feel free to take advantage of that. All right. I'll see you in 20 minutes. So as we close the doors, glass doors, what have you, so we can make sure and really hear our esteemed panelists, I have an announcement. Well, first of all, appreciation. Thank you for grabbing your meal so quickly and getting back so we can get going on time. I just want to point out that we have not built into this evening any time for any sort of structured public Q&A. In the immortal words of Jerry Reed, we've got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So instead, if you do have a question or a comment, something to ask, I'm going to ask that you direct your question to julia.martin@charlottenc.gov. Also, all the meeting materials can be found at this site. So you may want to jot that down if you want to access any of the presentations on your own later. Are we ready to roll? Yes? Yes? Then let's do this. So you're not going to hear from me anymore until maybe the very end, if at all. Hey, what's going on here? I don't know. But the rest of our evening is going to be a series of panel discussions led again by Sean Heath and Tracy Dodson. So I'm going to get out of the way and turn it over to them for the first one, and they'll introduce the panelists for each successive panel.
Great. Sean?
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Sean Heath, Housing and Neighborhood Services. We'll do quick introductions here. So flanked immediately to my right is Dion Nelson, President and CEO of Laurel Street, one of our affordable housing partners. A lot of experience with mixed income developments. And Dion has been doing this work for quite some time. A lot of experience in both development, finance, and operations. And we're thrilled to have you here with us tonight. To Dion's right is Laura Clark. Laura serves as the president and CEO of United Way of Central Carolinas. United Way of Central Carolinas has been doing great work in this community for over 90 years, really on the front lines in human services and also economic mobility. You'll hear tonight from Laura about some of the things that they've done under her leadership in terms of pivoting the focus for the United Way towards more place-based investments. So I'm glad to have Laura here. Thank you.
While we have a lot of experience on this panel, nobody looks a day over 30, by the way. Sean hit, and I'm looking at my notes. I'm like, well, there's a lot of experience here, but everybody's very young. Two over from me, Danielle Fraser with Charlotte Works, no stranger to everybody in this room. She's the president and chief executive officer. She's been with Charlotte Works for almost more than 15 years. And in her role, she works to ensure the Charlotte region has a skilled workforce. We heard a lot about that from Laura on the talent needs to meet the needs of today as well as tomorrow. And then she has proven the ability to collaborate with the industry and community partners to find solutions to assist individuals despite multiple obstacles they may face to employment. And so, Danielle, thank you. And right beside me, we have Gerard Camacho with Atrium Health. He is the Assistant Vice President for the Workforce Development. And he has joined Atrium in 2019 and is responsible for the design and implementation of the workforce development strategy. This work leads him to collaborate with community, business leaders, academic systems, as well as local and federal governments. And in his career, he has led workforce development initiatives across multiple sectors, including finance, government, and healthcare. And Gerard serves as an executive board member for Charlotte Mecklenburg School Foundation and the 2022 Board of Goodwill Industries, as well as a member of the CELC Workforce Development Working Team, which we'll hit on a little bit later. So with that, I'll kick it back to Sean if you want to ask. I'm ready to jump in. If you want to kick it back over to Sean to ask the first question.
Thank you, Tracy. So, Dion, first question for you. Dr. Chu painted a very practitioner that lives this market on a daily basis. You know, we're going to get real here, so give us kind of some of the sobering realities that you've faced as it relates to accelerating the production of affordable housing in this marketplace.
Well, thank you, Sean. Happy to share. The truth is, it's been very challenging. We've been doing work in affordable and mixed income housing for years, but this has been, without question, the time period post-COVID has been one of the most challenging in our careers, including the Great Recession and the downturn. And some of that really ties back to what was outlined. First and foremost, there's a supply and demand imbalance. And because there's a supply and demand imbalance, then there is active growth in the market in terms of building new housing, which is driving construction costs. So construction costs over the last couple of years have increased in many respects almost 50%. So when you're a mixed income housing developer, the way that, let me take a half step back, the market rate developers have continued to build through this increasing cost environment, but they've done that in large part by raising rents. Real estate development is a math problem, right? And market rate development is about delivering a certain return to the investors that provided the capital to build the building. So you committed when you agreed to do a development that you would offer a certain level of return, and because costs have gone up, you don't get the luxury to not deliver that return. So market rate developers who are not restricted on rents and who have a very high demand for units because there aren't enough units in the market have had the ability to raise rents very aggressively in a very short period of time. Now contrast that with the mixed income and affordable housing development market, where we face the same economics. We are building a market rate quality building, but we're trying to rent it to people at a more affordable rent rate. So we have had the same cost challenges, but not the same luxuries on the revenue side. And what that has done has effectively stalled production. There was a significant conversation with City Council in the fourth quarter around the number of affordable housing deals that were not able to move forward because of this challenge. And thankfully, City Council stepped up and staff stepped up to help us fix a number of deals. But frankly, it's not a problem that's really going away. The revenue and the expenses have fundamentally changed. So if we put the same subsidy into the marketplace and there is no significant relief to construction cost, and when you think about the supply-demand imbalance, the odds that Charlotte will see significant relief in construction costs, I believe, is unlikely. The need for continued subsidy, and frankly, more subsidy to deliver an even equal number of units to what we have historically built is unquestionable. I know that's not encouraging, but
It's the hard truth.
that's our reality.
Thank you, Dion.
So let's jump over to jobs. And Danielle, I'm going to ask you the first question, just kind of reflecting a little bit on what Laura presented and how some of that data has impacted your work and what you've seen over the past couple of years.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. I feel like Laura just kind of teed all of this up and told a lot of my story and how this is impacted. And without going too far into what she already shared, but you know, pre-COVID we had low unemployment, we had high labor force participation rates, we had a misalignment of available jobs and the skilled talent to make that match, and we still have that. But COVID also has exacerbated situations for certain segments of our talent, right? Whether that was in housing, childcare, transportation, and other areas that are needed to really have sustainable employment. And so that's impacted our work. Through our NC Works Career Services, we're down probably 30 to 50% in our traffic and who we're serving and who's coming to us for support. And so the reality is our workforce has changed. If the gig economy did not, if it did not exist prior to COVID, it is alive and kicking now, right? I mean, people have left jobs and occupations to do other jobs, whether it's independent contract, whether it's, I know some credentialed and skilled folks that are full-time Lyft drivers now, right? And so they're willing to work a few jobs independently to meet the needs of their circumstance or what their lifestyle is requiring. And so what we're really focused on, and Laura, she tapped on this a little bit, was we've got sideline talent, right? We knew we had talent on the sidelines prior to COVID, and this was talent that we may coin as untapped or hidden. You know, that talent that might have those stronger barriers to employment or education. And so this is where we've really been focused even pre-COVID, and that means getting our services, our NC Works Career Services, out into the community by partnering with trust partners like Goodwill Industries and the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office office and the county resource center and other community partners, we are excited to have a United Way grant to be able to extend and expand services in the Camp North End area. And so while we know that talent exists, that talent needs to know that we're here. They need to know how to access the services and the supports that we have to offer them so that they can get to work or get back to work. And so I want to kind of dispel this notion, and I think Laura did a good job of saying this too, is that people want to work, right? We heard people don't want to work. They don't want to, people are making money like they always have, right? They're just doing it and it looks differently. But I think eventually some of that is not going to be sustainable. And so again, a big piece of our work is going to the talent, not waiting for them to come to us, but we've got to go to them and let them know what's available to them so that we can serve them in their backyards.
Okay, Laura, so let's build on all of this, right? So Dion has underscored the challenges that we're facing. Clearly, there's a tremendous need for more supply of affordable housing. We know that there's a tremendous need to grow our talent, access to good-paying jobs. Give us a sense for how the United Way fits into this ecosystem in terms of your focus on place-based investments and aligning with corridors of opportunity and helping to build more vital, healthy households.
Sure, thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. So our United Way several years ago made the decision that we needed to overhaul how we were doing our work. The fundamentals of United Way haven't changed. We are still about addressing poverty and improving economic mobility, but we wanted to make sure we were doing it in the most responsive way possible in the community. And what that's resulted in is a shift from funding about 100 organizations sort of working independently of each other instead to a place-based model. So later this week, we'll announce a dramatically increased number of grants to organizations working collectively in some of our neighborhoods of greatest need. And what that's allowing us to do is bring a comprehensive, holistic solution, because what you heard earlier is that all of these issues we're talking about are interrelated. And at the center of that are human beings. And so United Way wants to make sure that the health and human services ecosystem is there as Dion is building houses, as Danielle is bringing jobs to communities. We want to make sure that the educational opportunities, health care, mental health care, whatever the other things are that a community needs, that all exists so that families can stay in the neighborhood of their choice if they want to do that. So we will go from what had been a pilot of 3 neighborhoods where we were making these place-based investments to aligning almost all of United Way's unrestricted funding to funding organizations in the 6 corridors of opportunity that the city has identified, as well as some areas in North Mecklenburg. And we're asking the nonprofits that are working in those communities to do their work differently. So first, it was the residents of these communities that decided what the needs were and what nonprofits they wanted to invite to work in their community. And second, we're really prioritizing organizations that can work in those neighborhoods. So we want to make access, we want to reduce that barrier of access sometimes to health and human services and make the services as proximate as possible. And then finally, we're asking those organizations to work together and work collectively so that hopefully we get a greater outcome than we would if any one organization was doing it on their own. Thank you, Luana. It's been a journey.
So let's switch to Gerard and talk a little bit from the perspective of an employer. And what kind of initiatives are you doing to support housing and affordable housing for your workforce, as well as workforce development initiatives? You guys, we've worked with you in a lot of different areas, from the Pearl to corridors and across. And so talk a little bit about Atrium's perspective in this kind of ecosystem of housing and jobs.
Absolutely, and thank you for inviting us here. Again, I'm really excited to be with this panel, with this group of people that have a lot of experience in the subject. Dr. Ulrich was doing a really great job talking in terms of the supply and the demand of the side of issues. And as an employer, we've seen that. We've seen that shortage of employers or employees that are not ready, and that supply on the side of the nursing pipeline or the CNA pipeline. We're trying to figure out what is the challenge that we see, and how do we provide all those opportunities for individuals in our communities to go into those healthcare careers, into those jobs, right? But like you're talking about, it's not only about providing an opportunity for employment. It's about providing a set of wraparound services for individuals to be successful in what they do or their destination in terms of a career. So little by little, we've been figuring out throughout the years that for us to be able to grow the talent pipelines that we need and to work with the community members, we need to invest also in the wraparound services of our community members and our employees as they're going through their career development opportunities and through those job growth opportunities. And that is to address the whole individual in terms of whether there's housing needs, there's food security needs, there may be a psychological item that needs to be addressed. There may be parents and they may need child support services. So little by little, we're trying to figure out what is that formula in terms of how do we provide equitable opportunities for individuals in our community and within our organization to continue to move forward. And Atrium has invested not only in the housing sector in terms of our partnership with Hope and how do we provide opportunities for individuals to go into those housing units, but also how do we continue to collaborate with our academic institutions and how do we bring individuals into healthcare careers at a much younger age? How do we provide exposure for those healthcare careers? So for example, we need to make sure that individuals in our community that are underserved or people of color, they can see themselves in those careers. They know and they understand that there's people of color that look like many of us that are in those jobs, and that it's not necessarily a 4-year degree, that it could be a technical college, or that it could be a hands-on learning experience, it could be an apprenticeship. So through that process, creating the exposure through not only career days for middle school age individuals or for high school students to come in and do tours of the facilities and for them to have hands-on learning opportunities through summer internships, but also we created some other programs like the Rise to Success program, which brings individuals that are rising seniors that may have a need to contribute to the family household income, but may not want to go to work in the service industry. So we give them the opportunity to come and work in the healthcare industry. We prepare them with a certification training, and then from there we pay for their education to continue to go and get that associate's degree in nursing. At the same time, we're providing those wraparound services. We have the opportunity right now to work with Bank of America and with Ally Bank, and we receive about $7.2 million in grant funding for expanding all these pipelines from the creation of exposure in our communities for healthcare careers for young individuals to actually participating in our programs. We're also working with the colleges to expand those nursing pipelines. Dr. Ulrich was talking about how is it that individuals may want to go into those nursing degrees, but there's not enough seats for them. So let me give you an example. We did an analysis with Radius Group in the past 6 months in terms of what is the projected analysis for our nursing, for our CNA, for our LPNs, for our radiological sciences, all those really important pieces or jobs that we have in the healthcare sector. We quickly realized that we're going to need about 1,800 more nurses than what we're graduating in our community in the next 3 years. That means that we're never going to catch up to that total number of new hires that we need in order to be just at par with the total nursing population that is graduating from these colleges. So we are working with our community colleges and with our own colleges to increase the number of seats, going to the nursing, to the boards of nursing to request the ability to increase those number of seats so that by 2027, we're able to graduate the amount of nurses that our community needs. Now, that's Atrium's need alone. We need to make sure that we're working with Caramon, that we're working with Novant, and that we're working with all the members of our community to truly understand how do we address this supply and demand issue, and how do we create alternative pathways for not only college pathways, but also hands-on learning opportunities. And you'll see tomorrow, and you'll get to know and understand a little bit more about what we're doing with the Innovation District and some other opportunities for jobs tomorrow with Hillary Critton being here. But in terms of that, I guess that's a very long answer to a very short question in terms of what are we doing to invest, and we're working with the community to create those opportunities for mobility in our sector.
That was great. Thank you. Sean, do you want to ask the next question? Or?
Yeah, for sure. So, Dion, back to you. And once again, we're pulling the thread here on the idea of integrated solutions, housing and jobs. How can these fit together? and recognizing that with housing, more units is good. But I know that Laurel Street is focused on education and employment and transportation and other factors that really enhance a household. So can you provide some perspective on the things that you're doing above and beyond bringing new units online?
Well, first and foremost, I think the way we think about that connectivity is heavily tied to location. So not just building new units in any neighborhood that we could possibly find a parcel of land to build new units. And we agree, we need units. So at some point, a unit is better than not having a unit. But I think when resources are limited, our ability to really think about where can we build units in the most advantageous locations where people have the transit that they need, access to transit, which gets them to the jobs that they need and that they have, and to the other resources and supports that they want, including education. So I think that has to be a priority for the development community and for the community at large, so that we're making sure that low and moderate income families can have access. Beyond access, I think it is about the supportive services and that kind of holistic support of a family's progression and economic growth. Having said that, I also think sometimes Charlotte can be a little guilty of over supporting a family, meaning a family doesn't need 5 caseworkers, right? And so they know what they need better than we do. Right? Sometimes I think we make assumptions that a family of a certain income level must need blank, 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 and blank. What we need to do, and I think where we can do a better job as a apartment owner and now a property management provider, we can really work with our residents to listen to them and understand what services and what additional supports they need and what would add value to their life. And frankly, as you listen to this panel and as I look around the room and see the faces of the programs and providers in the room, I think the services exist. It's about helping them connect the dots. So our goal wouldn't be to recreate services that already exist. It would really be to facilitate how do our residents get connected to the programs and the services that are available, and how can we collaborate? Because frankly, as I listen to some of the programs that Gerard is describing, Atrium has done, I would say, how can we allow you to come present that to our youth? Right? Let's open a venue and get the kids in a room and allow them to hear about those programs. So I think we can do some of that collaboration better, and that would frankly be my goal, enhanced for 2023.
Thank you.
Deanne actually took the last question that I was going to ask, which is, we're not printing money, so how do we collaborate better together, and how do we work better together? So I'm glad you pointed that out. Danielle, will you talk a little bit about some insights just from the employment ecosystem of what you see in trying to make those connections between housing and employment, transportation, and kind of your perspective on that?
Yeah, I've heard Mayor Lyles talk about these 3 areas of housing, employment, and transportation as the 3-legged stool. And they're very connected to each other and critical to one's, I think, success as they're on their, whether it's their career journey or whatever journey that is that they're on. And so we find that very foundational for us. At one point years ago, through our NC Works Center services, we were very siloed, right? We looked at just workforce development. And so when we had a job seeker come through our doors and needed housing, transportation, we're a little bit more flexible with assisting with, or if it was childcare, we'd say, hey, take this referral, go talk to so-and-so, come back to us when you're ready for employment, right? But over the years, we've had to look at, as Gerard and Dion have mentioned, we have to look at the whole person. And so when someone is coming through our doors and they need housing or they need childcare, we are still focused on workforce, absolutely. That is our niche, but we have started to really establish and strengthen our relationships with housing, with transportation, with childcare and others, so that we're able to follow that individual, do more warm handoffs or co-location of services and support, right? So making sure that we're following these individuals from network to network so that they're not falling through our cracks. If I did not work in this industry, I probably wouldn't know how to navigate this workforce system. I mean, that's the reality, right? And all of us in this room, I would venture to say we have some level of social capital, right? And so thinking of our community that does not have that level of access, we have to be the social capital for the people that we're serving. So we have to connect those dots. We have to make sure they're not falling through the cracks of our systems. And so that's where we're trying to be stronger and making those connections with all of our community partners so that we're following these individuals, again, from network to network, and making sure that, hey, did you get housing? Do you have transportation? Let's continue to work with you, because these things have to happen sometimes simultaneously. It is difficult sometimes for our talent when they come to us and they do have housing challenges to be, engaged in a workforce activity when they don't know where they're going to lay their head at night. And so we understand that's very difficult, but we want to walk alongside them in that journey, even though our expertise is workforce, but we want to make sure they're getting the supports from our other partners so that when they're really ready, we're walking alongside of them and that they're ready for work.
Let's pivot just a bit, Laura, and go back in time to 2021 when there was some work spearheaded by Mecklenburg County and Charlotte Center City partners with a particular emphasis on housing and homelessness, referred to at the time as the 2025 Housing and Homelessness Strategy, since evolved into what's being referred to as a Home for All, with United Way serving as the lead agency for that work. I'd venture to say there may be some folks here this evening and that are watching that aren't familiar with the Home for All. I know there's a lot to unpack and we can't unpack it all here, but can you give us a sense for what is a Home for All, the vision, where is it headed, what does the timeline look like, how are people engaged on the work?
Yeah, thanks. So a Home for All was created with Center City Partners as the lead, the county, the city, and over 200 other stakeholders, including key corporate partners, Atrium being one of them, as a comprehensive plan to address both homelessness and affordable housing in our community. We've had plans in the past that have addressed pieces of these things. Other cities have had plans that have addressed pieces of these things. This plan truly is unique because it is acknowledging, perhaps really for the first time as a community, that we really have to think about this issue very holistically, and we really have to put people at the center of it. So it also includes a focus on prevention of homelessness, on housing stability, keeping people housed when they are housed, and also the wraparound services. So what are the health, mental health, job training, what are all of the other things that somebody needs to stay stably housed? As you can imagine, the plan is quite robust. I say that it's a beautiful plan. It includes nearly 100 recommendations, I think, all the things that we would want for our community and we should want. But I also think it's important that we be realistic as we are as ambitious in our vision, right? And so as United Way has taken on this role as the lead implementing agency to sort of oversee, guide, serve as the chief cat herder, however you want to frame it, of all of this good work that's already happening by so many of our providers in the community, we want to put real cost to some of these recommendations. And I think that's also where some of our plans in the past maybe fell short, as we had wonderful recommendations but never got real with each other about what it was going to take to pull them off. So Catherine Furman Sellers and Connie Stottinger on our team are now working with consultants and a technical committee that many of you in the room are serving on to prioritize some of those recommendations and to start to put some cost estimates to what would it take for us to do this. And I think that will help us then as a community really decide where we're going to put our priority. I think we're going to be shocked at the dollar signs. And I say that because when I was working with Dion out at Renaissance West, that community on the whole was about $100 million investment. And I had people regularly say to me, like they were shocked, like that's too much money, right? You'll never replicate this because it's too much money. And my response to it is when you disinvest in communities for decades, it's gonna cost a lot of money to reverse that. And I think we need to be honest about it. Now, it doesn't mean that every community has to be a Renaissance where a public housing project needed to be torn down and all that, but it's not inexpensive to turn back the tide, right? But it doesn't mean we can't do it. We just need to prioritize. We need to understand that this is a long-term goal that homelessness and affordable housing are complex issues without easy solutions, or we wouldn't all still be talking about it, right? The mayor referenced looking at affordable housing 20 years ago. We were doing the same at United Way. I was looking at the cost burden households as a researcher at United Way all those years ago. The problem is just getting bigger. The good thing about Charlotte is I think we are a city that, because of our size and our can-do spirit and our public-private partnerships, we can tackle this, and we will see some progress if we stick with it.
That's exciting. And I think, as I look back at my 30 years of Charlotte, it's really exciting to see where we are right now with a lot of this collaboration that's happening with everybody in the room. And similar to a Home for All, we've tried to develop a strategic plan around jobs with Hire Charlotte with the ecosystem. So we all have our own lanes, but we're all moving together. Gerard, I mentioned earlier that you were on the Charlotte Executive Leadership Council's Workforce Development Committee. Can you talk about some of your priorities? And I know you know Hire Charlotte too. Can you talk about how some of the priorities there align with the city and where we're trying to go with upward mobility?
Absolutely. And I see Blair Stanford standing back there. She is the president and our fearless leader at the CEOC. We have, in terms of the workforce strategy, I co-lead with Catherine Black with Bank of America, and we have two main key priorities for this workforce committee for 2023. And one is going to be to build capacity for employers to accelerate non-traditional workforce development opportunities at scale in the market region. And the second one is going to be to establish commitments for CLC members and employers to align on CLT Alliance employer commitment goals with focus on access, development, and social capital. What this means is, again, I was talking about the work that we just did with Radius Group in terms of mapping those critical job roles. As employers, we keep saying, we need talent. We need talent. And in the community and everywhere else, we keep hearing there's a shortage. There's a shortage. Well, now we know and understand truly what that supply and demand looks like for critical job roles. And what we're trying to do, and that's what we did for healthcare. We took our critical job roles, we did the analysis and surveys out, first of all, to know and understand how many of these CNA positions or nursing positions am I going to be forecasted to need in the next 5 years, right? And we're counting into account attrition, retirement, everything that Dr. Ulrich was talking about in terms of like the projection of growth, competition coming in, our own expansion, our normal turn and churn. So we took into account all those numbers and projected out to the future to know and understand how many of these job codes we're going to need in the future, right, in the next 5 years. Based on that, that's whenever we did the analysis to go and survey every single academic institution to know how many students do you have in these job roles or in these future job roles, in these careers, in these degrees. How many are graduating? Where are they going? We did an analysis of what is our market share as Atrium Health, right? Whenever they graduate, they come and do their clinicals here, but how many of them are we retaining? So we are retaining 35% in CPCC. Okay, perfect. How many of those can we increase, right? And what are going to be the members of our community that we can go ahead and provide opportunities to go into those job roles or into those careers by pushing them through our workforce development programs, right? Getting them early, like Dr. Ulrich was talking about too. Going to other areas where we haven't gone before to provide those opportunities, because doing the same thing is not going to lead us to getting new outcomes. We know where that leads us, and that's going to lead to the same outcomes and the same shortages. So how do we provide individuals in our community those opportunities and exposure to those careers? So as we are augmenting those seats, we have people that fills those seats, right? Because if we go to our normal communities and we go to the normal people that are going to college or to the community college, we know that we're tapped out. We need to figure out how to get more individuals interested in this, and individuals that will go into other sectors like retail that need to contribute to the family household income to go into these careers. Okay, perfect. But now the challenge that we have is that we want to do the same thing for every single critical job role in our region. And we're mapping out not only the healthcare jobs that are critical job roles for us to serve our patient population, to make sure that we have enough people to provide adequate healthcare services, but also we need to know and understand how many in those critical job roles that industry needs, whether it's Coca-Cola bottling, or it's going to be Duke Energy, or it's going to be Bank of America, or it's going to be whomever. we need to figure out what those job roles are and do the same analysis so that we know the exact number of people that we need to grow within the next 5 years. And then from there, have intelligent conversations about supply and demand and capacity for how do we expand those opportunities, and whether it's going to be an apprenticeship or it's going to be a learn-on-the-job experience, or is it going to be a community college experience? Are we downgrading jobs to not require a college degree but just require a technical certification training? So from there, that's the work that we're focusing on at the CLC. What is the beginning? That's that base. We want to make sure that people are participating in this workforce development analysis so that then we can go ahead and lay out the foundation of how do we continue to elevate members of our community to go into those job roles and those vacancies that we know that we have. Because we can meet and we can make sure that people go and find jobs in high livable wages or family sustaining wages. We just need to lay the road so that we can go ahead and provide them with the wraparound services that they need and make sure that they're successful in completing their education so they can get that job role.
I just have one bonus question for you, Dion, if that's okay. So Dion also serves as a member of the Charlotte Executive Leadership Council, and tying this all under an economic mobility umbrella, what's your perspective on potential collaboration, public-private sector collaboration, focused on economic mobility for low-income households in Charlotte?
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of it, and that has, what I have observed is that CLC has been listening. And I've only been on CLC for a year and really came to the table trying to understand how does this group do its work. So what I appreciated first was a perspective of wanting to hear from the provider. So let's take education, for example. What does the public education system in our community need, and then how can this community of companies support those needs? Everything from actual dollars and resources, but more importantly, loaned executives, support for volunteer programs, really trying to provide organization and structure to accomplish some of the goals that have already been identified and already been outlined. Again, not trying to recreate the wheel. So I think that is happening. Where I think we can continue to do more collaboration is to continue to think about the next step of some of this programmatic work, like what was just described on workforce development. How do we get the next stage? To me, in some ways, the large companies in Charlotte will provide a lot of those opportunities and a lot of that support, but I'll speak for myself. I'm an entrepreneur. I run a small business, right? I have 20 people that work for me. But there are a lot of small businesses that have an opportunity to impact the Charlotte economy. So then how do we plug in once that analysis is complete and once that path is identified? How do I connect with Danielle to recognize, okay, I may only be hiring one person in the next six months, but that's still one job that I could potentially provide an opportunity that would not typically be available to someone that she serves. So I think the continued collaboration is the key. I think Charlotte is lucky in that the culture of our community is one that we work together. We just are being challenged in an unusually aggressive manner. And so then the question is, how can we dial up what we already do? How can we do it a little bit more? How can we stretch ourselves to be even further connected and make one more relationship and kind of expand the network so it isn't just the folks that have the social capital that are in this room? How do we get it to the next level? But I think I see that and the foundation for that, and I think we have greater opportunity as we go forward.
Well said. Thank you. Tracy, please.
Yeah, no, I'm watching the manager over here. I'm going to open it up, go rogue a little bit, but open it up for maybe one or two quick questions, just so that we can hear some of it. I know that we're pushing most of it but we have such a passionate wealth of knowledge and experience here that I feel like the audience should be able to ask a question or two. Not everybody jump out of your seat at the same time. Anybody?
So let me help out with this. This summit is for the community. We have a lot of members in our community that have joined us. We've heard a lot of great information so far today. So we have asked for their
We have a lot of good information that has been shared today, but this event is for you all, the community, and we have a lot of community members in the back. So we wanted to make sure that we hear from you. So if there's an ability for you if something has been said that you would like to have further information on, we are making sure that that space is open. Since it's only 1 or 2 questions we're going to be able to get, we really want to hear from community members prior to elected officials, because there's a lot of us in the room. We want to hear from, if there's, as we have a young woman who's hand up in the back. What I would ask though, please, ask your question without a mini dissertation, because they only let me get 2 of them in. So if you would please ask your question so that we can get to some real solutions for you. Thank you.
I got this. One question two questions that I am wondering about. Oh, I do apologize. April Lewis, Action NC community organizer, housing justice advocate, along with the community members that we work to make sure was present. My question is, first question is, what are the challenges that you're facing with implementation? And then when it comes to policy and innovations, what are each one of these stakeholders willing to actually have conversations around when it comes to really building policies to actually protect the community? To be more specific, what are you willing to do that is outside of the box? And when are you willing to bring the community into these conversations so that way we can help you build it up from the ground up or get support for what we already have in the works?
Thank you for that. My innovation heart, designed with, not for, mine just went, yes, that. Comments, reactions?
So if I understand the question, what are we willing to do different that we haven't done before? Okay. Well, I would say we're open-minded, right? I will admit that these last couple of years, it's been hard to do what we always used to do. So we've been buried in trying to dig out of what we committed to deliver to this city in 2019 and 2020 has been difficult to execute. So that's the reality of kind of where we are. Having said that, we should always be willing to have the conversation. And I would actually look to our city staff and our city leadership to facilitate some of those conversations. I'm frankly going to put the question back to you. What's the ask, right? And as we talk about those things, then we can try to find solutions to work together.
We're going to do that as a follow-up later. So we got 2 questions in, so I get one more person that can ask a question, but I will come back there to get your info before it's all said and done.
Well done.
My name is Kenny Robinson, and I represent Freedom Fighting Missionaries. My question for the panel is, a lot of what has been said is suggestions that are coming from the top down, right, with the atriums and some of the other organizations represented being at the top, and all of the wonderful things that they're going to do to get down to those of us at the bottom. Where is the effort coming from that panel and from the people in the room to support those of us at the bottom so we can come up? Which means, in short, is there any efforts being discussed to support the grassroots organizations who are currently doing the work right now in this city, that the support that they need is just pretty much financially based? So that is my question. Where's that effort coming from the bottom up?
Hey, Kenny, I'm happy to address that from United Way's standpoint. So this really is the shift that we've made. So what we'll announce later this week is that United Way's funding going forward is going almost entirely to neighborhood-based and grassroots organizations. So we are ending funding to most of our legacy partners, not because they don't do wonderful work, but because we recognize that we needed to open up our table. And the further step of that is, for the neighborhood-based work, the decisions about which nonprofits are being funded were made in large part by the residents of the communities where those services will be provided. So it was resident-led, facilitated panels where United Way was there as a partner to provide support, but I sat in on those conversations, and they really were driven by what the needs and aspirations are for those communities. So, you know, United Way's funding is significant, but still not enough, right? It's not sufficient, but we hope that by taking this step, other funders will come along in similar fashion and maybe start to look at some of the grassroots and neighborhood-based organizations in a similar way.
Kenny, Sean Heath, one other thing I would mention is that with some of our ARPA funds, we're standing up a nonprofit grant program with United Way serving as our administrative partner, as well as the Hispanic Federation. And one of the things we're doing very intentionally with this particular grant program is we've earmarked a certain amount of the funding that will be devoted to grassroots organizations of a certain size to ensure that you have an opportunity to compete for the funding on more of a level playing field. So we look forward to having that roll out in the near future. And with that, I think we'll thank this panel for their efforts this evening and transition to the next.
Hey, David, I'm sorry, one real quick thing. In the spirit of opening up the table that Laura just mentioned, for those of you that are in the back, I know we only have space for a couple of questions, but we've got council members dispersed and county commissioners at these tables. If you'd like to come up and be a part of the discussion at each table, you're more than welcome. Just want to make sure that's clear. We've got room for you at our table. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you. Good to see you. Take care. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Okay, David, we're back on. Okay, great. Now we're going to pivot into a more housing-centric conversation with a few folks that we've got here, leaders from the local ecosystem. Once again, I'll do real quick introductions, and then we'll just dive right in. So, Fulton Meacham from Enlivian, our local housing authority. Charlotte Housing Authority was established in 1939. I had to look that one up, and that goes back a ways, right? Enlivian has been a great partner of ours in the affordable housing space, and one of the things that Fulton will talk a little bit about this evening are some of the things that they're thinking about above and beyond just bricks and sticks. So, Fulton, thank you very much for being here this evening. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Seated to Fulton's right is Laura Belcher, President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity. Habitat has been a great partner associated with all things related to homeownership. And it's not just what you see on the news, right? That's an important part of it. We got volunteers out in the community helping build homes. But Laura's really going to breathe life into some of the challenges that we're facing in this particular marketplace that Dr. Chu alluded to earlier. And you know, some of the calls to action for us to consider as a community as we grapple with these things. And then to my far right here is Judy Selden Cohen. Judy serves as board chair for the Away Home Endowment that was established about 10 years ago here in Charlotte, a $26 million endowment that's has a very laser-focused mission on helping individuals that are either at risk of homelessness or in the midst of homelessness get on a path towards independence with rental subsidies and I would underscore the and, a real emphasis on the supportive services necessary for those individuals to really be ready for independence and self-sufficiency. Judy has worn many hats during her career in the private sector, also an author and a community leader, and she's served on the board for Away Home since its inception. So thank you all for being here. So let's just jump straight into it. Fulton, we're going to go with you. We don't need much of a preamble here. We've got challenges. In the midst of challenges, there can be opportunities. Give us your perspective where we're at.
Well, the challenges, I think, have already been detailed a little bit here already. The actual supply of housing in general and specifically affordable housing is critical, right? I think I can't say it any better than Dr. Chu or Dion that's already explained it today. But let's talk about it from the standpoint of Enlivian and the Housing Authority. and how it impacts some of the families that we serve every single day, right? What does that mean for us? So we run the largest affordable housing program actually in the state. It's our Housing Choice Voucher Program. And that actually supplies subsidies for families to live in the private sector throughout this city. It's a public-private partnership between us and other landlords to allow our families to live with them. Right now, it's taking somewhere close to 100 days for a family to probably find a place. Right, that's what the impact of supply on the people. Right. On the other side of it is we talked about raising the cost of housing right now, how expensive it is to live here in Charlotte. Right now, for a one-bedroom, probably about $1,400. We have to add utilities to that, so let's call it $1,600 to actually be able to maintain an apartment here in Charlotte. You got to be making about $68,000 a year in order to basically live in a one-bedroom. Most of my families are 2, 3, 4 bedrooms here in Charlotte, right? So we're pricing families out of housing, but the Housing Choice Voucher is one of those things that is supposed to also be able to make it affordable for families, right? But sometimes the price of housing is outpacing the increase of our Housing Choice Voucher, right? And so for us, it's all about how do we continue to increase our vouchers to be competitive in this market, right? Because we've had to make some changes. We've had some great discussions with the city, great discussions with the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, and said, hey, Fulton, we'll take some vouchers, but the real issue for us is it's got to be able to at least be able to pay what our rent is. So we've gone to HUD and asked for some of these modifications to get our payment standards up so that we can actually house more families here in Charlotte.
Thank you, Fulton. Okay, we're going to go down the line here with a similar question. Laura, I know that you're a straight shooter, so give it to us straight. What's going on in home ownership, and where do you see some opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Chu did a great job of laying out some of the information. I'm not going to reiterate some of his, but there's a couple of points that I want to point out to augment some of what he talked about. You know, he shared that the value of houses, the median value of houses has gone up 54%. In just 2.5 years, right? So if you own a home, that can be a really good thing. If you don't own a home, that can be a real barrier to access for starter homes, right? But if you do own a home and you're in a low income, fixed income situation, the ramification on your property taxes is also going to be extreme because of the increase in home values, and with wages not keeping up to a 54% increase in value, the consequence of property taxes is going to be a real thing as we come into a new revaluation this year. The other thing that we talked about, or Dr. Chu talked about, was that only 3% of houses in the marketplace are under $150,000, only 25% are under $300,000. But the reality of who's buying those houses right now is institutional investors. And so what's happening in our community is, one, we've talked a lot about supply and demand. We don't have enough supply. And what we're now doing is stripping some of the supply away from our own community, right? And so what we know is that in 2021, 1 in 7 houses that changed hands sold to an institutional investor who likely then flipped it into a rental situation, denying the opportunity for current residents that are trying so hard to find housing to be able to become a homeowner. And so we're going backwards. We want to add more units, but we're also stripping units away from home ownership. And I think that that's an important thing for us to be understanding in our community. And I think it's especially important when we add a lens of racial equity, because we have a racial home ownership gap that is as bad today as it was 50 years ago. So there's nothing to be proud of there. And what's happening with the institutional investors is there's a lot more activity in historically black and neighborhoods of color are being preyed on with institutional investors. And so it has a disproportionate impact on our communities of color, stripping those houses away from home ownership. I'm painting a pretty bleak picture, but that's some of the challenges we're struggling with, right? And if this is a community that really wants to celebrate and support economic mobility, we have to find ways to provide affordable home ownership to our hardworking community.
Thank you, Laura. Judy, moving down, beyond the 30,000-foot description that I gave for Away Home, can you really breathe life into it as one of the hidden gems in our community in terms of programming that's really making an impact?
Thank you. So Away Home lives at the nexus between housing and jobs. We move families who are experiencing homelessness into market rate apartments, and our rental subsidy covers the difference between what the landlord is charging and what the family can afford to pay. But it's a temporary subsidy. We also arrange for a social worker to help the family overcome the barriers that led them to become homeless. So she is in most cases, she is the navigator for that parent to find a better job, to find affordable childcare, to find reliable transportation, and to get resources for the trauma, the mental health issues that have contributed to this family becoming homeless. Our typical Away Home family is a mom with 2 kids who is working at a really low-paying job. And I'll tell you, when we started in 2014, our moms were earning $7.25, and when Charlotte Works came to talk to us, we were happy to try and get them a $10 or $12 an hour job. Now, with wage inflation, and we'll talk about rents rising as well, but with wages and the labor market the way it is, our moms can get a $15 an hour job, and sometimes with benefits, which is unheard of and extraordinarily helpful. These moms are usually women of color. Almost all have a high school diploma or a GED. And all the families entering Away Home earn under 50% AMI, which, as you may know, is under $38,000 a year for a family of 3. Most of our moms earn under 30% AMI, less than $23,000. But after 2 years of rental subsidies and social services, the parent is better equipped to pay her own rent. Often she has accumulated savings, and she often stays in the same home for the 2 years of the subsidy and then 2 years afterwards, which for a family that's been bounced around experiencing homelessness gives extraordinary stability to the mom in building a social network and to the children in staying in the same school. The social service agency that manages the social worker keeps in contact with the parent for 2 years after the subsidy ends and after the social worker is no longer navigating for the parent. We track housing stability, employment status, and whether there is a new eviction. This idea of rental subsidies arose because, as many of you may remember, 10 years ago, affordable housing developments were repeatedly stalled by neighborhood protests, particularly if rezoning was required. By scattering families into homes that were already built, Away Home eliminated any not in my backyard protests. Providing a rental subsidy also turned a market rate home that was too expensive into affordable housing, but without construction costs or construction delays. A public-private partnership was essential for this idea to gain traction. Subsidizing market rate leases in scattered sites promised to disperse families across all the city council districts, gaining support from the council members then in office in both the Crescent and the Wedge. Mecklenburg County funded the social workers, allowing Away Home dollars to be reserved for the rental subsidy. The city contributed $10 million to the endowment. Thank you. And the Foundation for the Carolinas raised another $16 million from corporate and family foundations. The income from this $26 million endowment is what funds the 2 years of rental subsidies. And by using only the income and not the capital, this is a permanent source of funding for our community.
Thank you, Judy. And just when you thought you were going to get a little breather, I'm going to stick with you because you're on a roll, and then we'll bring it back here towards me with another question for Laura and Fulton, and then we'll open it up consistent with the last panel for 2 questions from the audience if we could. So, you know, the notion of the supports as an essential ingredient, you certainly touched on that. If there's anything in that realm that you would underscore, please do. And then if you can carry that into a conversation on how do you measure impact in this work? How do you know if it's really moving the needle?
So Away Home grants funds to agencies which are skilled in this work of moving families from homelessness into housing. Since 2014, we have been granting funds to Charlotte Family Housing and to the Salvation Army Center of Hope. We just completed a series of discussions with grassroots agencies. We are really excited to welcome Heal Charlotte as our 3rd Away Home agency. But this is more than a pass-through grant. The program manager at Foundation for the Carolinas convenes the agency social workers plus the program leaders nearly every month. Mecklenburg County managers attend this meeting, as do the staff at Social Serve, now the Housing Collaborative, which often assists with solving move-in problems for our families. The foundation arranges for employers, such as hospitals and banks, to speak at these technical committee meetings so that the social workers have a firsthand understanding of what the mom needs to do in order to get a better job with benefits, with upward mobility, things that are very hard to find on your own. We also benefit from Charlotte Works and other employment specialists. Away Home has arranged access to mental health resources for the families, which has been especially important since the start of the pandemic. And now Away Home is funding a ready-to-rent program for these families through Dream Key Partners, providing guidance to them on how to be a good tenant and also what to expect from their landlord. The technical committee facilitates communication among Away Home agencies who have been sharing best practices. And one of the things that we're really excited about with Heal Charlotte is that they have a somewhat different model from the ones that our agencies have been using. And this opportunity to share what works in a safe room is really helpful to the social workers. We are looking for ways to better support the social workers who serve these families. They experience burnout and the traumas that the families that they work with experience. The social worker is right alongside. Retaining social workers is really critical for success, but this is the difficult and stressful public-facing job that one of our speakers talked about before, and turnover is an issue, and it's an issue that has also surfaced in the A Home for All meetings. But because we are public-private, we have a lot of flexibility in how our agencies use the funding. For example, 2 of our moms had high-risk pregnancies, and they couldn't go to work, didn't have paid leave, and so we paid their full rent through the end of their pregnancy and the birth of each of those children until they could go back to work. And there wasn't a lot of paperwork to have to fill out because we have that flexibility.
Thank you, Judy. Now you can take a breather. Okay, Laura, we've heard a lot tonight about new housing and construction costs. In a community like ours, we know another part of the equation, of course, is what are the things we can do to preserve housing, both multifamily and single-family housing. So can share some perspective on the things that Habitat is doing to preserve affordable housing.
Absolutely. We feel strongly that we need new units, but if we don't preserve the aging inventory in Charlotte, we'll be taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So it's a both-and strategy, and we are pleased. Habitat's been working with the city for a dozen years on our critical home repair program, and so what we're focused on there, is leveraging both public dollars and private dollars to address the needs of aging inventory in Charlotte. So mostly what we're looking at is owner-occupied homes. The average age of the constituency that we serve is 68. The average AMI is 35%. This is a grant program, jobs their entire career and haven't amassed the funds and resources to be able to maintain the home. So what we'll do is for qualified families go in, do a whole home assessment. We'll look and see is there lead risk, asbestos. We'll look at major systems. We're looking at the roof, the foundation, the HVAC, the electrical, and the plumbing. There are too many residents in our community that are living in substandard conditions, right? And I say all the time, that's something you can't tell from driving down the street what the inside of the home looks like. We have one that we worked on last year that had a beautiful flower garden in the front because they didn't want to not fit in with their neighbors, but had no heat and no opportunity to use the oven on the inside. And so, you just don't know from the outside what's happening on the inside. And we have too many neighbors that are struggling with that. So we go in, we'll do a whole house assessment, and then provide those repairs for those families. What we're finding, Dion talked eloquently about the increasing costs. So projects, we're halfway through our fiscal year, right? So projects that we thought when we were budgeting at the beginning of the year would cost $34,000 when we did our budget in June are costing $41,000, right? So 20% in 7 months. That's a massive increase in cost, and we're trying to do close to 200 projects a year. You do the math on that, and that's a pretty big funding gap. So we're working as hard as we can to support the need. What we have seen though is a huge escalation in demand from the community. So much so that I'll admit that we stopped taking applications for repairs because the pipeline got too full. And so we are looking at when we can reopen that this spring or summer, but the backlog became a year and a half to wait for repairs because the demand has increased. The more that we do, the more the word gets out and the more demand we have for these projects. So living in substandard conditions is something that's definitely a challenge for this community, especially for our seniors, our low income and families of color.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, Fulton, you're going to bring us home here, and we're back to the concept of...
I know they're not ready for that. Go ahead.
So back to the concept of investments in people as being complementary to our investments in assets in terms of infrastructure. Provide some perspective around Olivia's work in terms of your self-sufficiency programming for households and life coaches, those sorts of things.
Okay. So we all know, well, we've been in the business for more than 80 years, right? Housing families, right? But it's more than a bricks and sticks issue, right? How do you help a family move in, up, and out of subsidized housing was something that we had to start focusing on roughly 10 years ago. And we have a program, it's called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. So what does that mean at the end of the day? We focus on adults age 18 to 61, basically, and so surround them with supportive services, right? And we also have a mandatory work requirement for those individuals actually to live in our sites, right? And so we have life coaches that work with them on things like, okay, childcare, right? If you're a mother of two, okay, that we just got through talking about that don't have school-age children, how do you go to work without having childcare? So we provide childcare. So we also have education. So if you want to go back and get your GED or you want to go to college, we provide that for you as well through our life coaches. Transportation, another big issue, getting back and forth to work, et cetera. Addressing those barriers that are preventing individuals from going to work is basically what this FSS program is. And it's all about, at the end of the day, surrounding someone with the support that they need, because if they could do it themselves, they would, right? But it's not us telling them what they are going to do. It's us really, with our life coaches, getting with them and finding out what they want to do, right? Being a coach at the end of the day of how do you want to get to your goals at the end of the day. And we normally sign a up to 7-year contract with those families, track them along this period of time, again, provide them those supports that they need to, again, move up and out of affordable housing. We right now have about 1,400 families that are in our FSS program. When families are participating with us, their average income is about $23,000 a year. If they're not supported by us, it's around $13,000. $65,000. So it shows that if you provide your families with some supportive services, they can move up that economic ladder. Now, again, I want you to understand, what do we say rents were again? And how much it costs to live in market rate housing? $68,000. Okay, so to go from 23 to 68,000, that's a heck of a jump, right? So it's not always going to take 1 or 2 years, at least for our family. Sometimes it's going to take longer than that. But at the end of the day, they're on that journey. They're on the way there, right? And we really appreciate a lot of the support from a lot of the groups that are in this room and our partners, because we don't actually provide the services. We link people to the services at the end of the day. So our families have more opportunities. On top of that, so we have the FSS program that kind of then moves them into the American dream of home ownership. Okay, and so we work with organizations, lenders in town, and our housing choice voucher basically is a subsidy. We'll allow them to take that housing choice voucher, convert it into income, right? So now they can qualify for a house using their salary along with the income from the housing choice voucher to actually qualify for a home. We have 8 of those that happened this year. Well, excuse me, last year. Normally it is, though, somewhere we normally have about 15 to 20 families that we are able to find housing before, but I think Dr. Cho showed you, again, $350,000. It's tough, right? So what we're going to need more of is down payment assistance in order for more families to actually get to the end goal of home ownership.
Thank you, Fulton. David, I think we can accommodate 2 questions and still stay on schedule, so open it up.
Talk to me, Goose. I see one.
Don't ask that guy in the middle right there. Don't do it. With the glasses.
Good evening, good people. Tiffany Fant, West Side native, Charlotte native, Soul Nation Inc. Executive Director. Particularly with Black seniors. I live off the Beatty-Ford Road corridor, so a very vulnerable population. In the spirit of collaboration, what does it feel like or what could it look like when there are grassroots organizations doing the same work as legacy organizations and maybe diverting some of your backlog and even possibly dollars to these nonprofit organizations, i.e. critical home repair? So that is an initiative that is happening. So what does that look like? And getting funding. So if you all can handle it, hey, we'll take 4, 5, 7, 10 houses.
So we are doing some and interested in doing more of working with the neighborhood associations that are on the ground, right? And so we want to partner. That's a great way that we're actually getting referral sources, is that neighborhood associations are sending us the information around households and families that need the repairs. And so, that is a good way to keep the flow of information and the pipeline full. I think, the economics are, our capacity is constrained by our funding. So it's not an issue that we've got extra funding and it's a funding constraint. And with more funding, we would serve more families. So we're working through what that looks like for the next several years to leverage additional funding, public dollars and private dollars, right? So we're working on private funding as well to grow the program.
Another question? Thank you, John, for helping me get my steps in today.
Hi, thanks everybody for this summit and for this panel. I'm John Clegger and I'm a local pastor. As we've talked about collaboration and creativity and thinking outside the box, we're also aware that we've got a gigantic number, whatever it is, 35,000, 50,000 units. And the temptation on behalf of the people who control all the money may be to just try to fill fill the hole as fast as we can, and so look at deals on a purely per unit cost basis, when in fact housing requires very complex solutions for some of the most low-income folks we're dealing with. So take it as a question or a point of encouragement for those that are in city staff and elected offices and other philanthropic roles. I hope we won't just fall into a pattern of taking, chunking out as many units as we can on a per dollar basis without looking at collaborative, complex, creative deals like putting housing on church property. We don't always pass the lipstick test up against bigger projects, but every unit is needed. So, end of sermon. Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Do you have time for one more?
Yeah, this goes till 7:05, so I think we have time for one more.
Uh-oh. Thank you. I'm Tim Sidema, and I appreciate also everybody putting the work in for this to make this summit happen. I'm curious. I'm involved in a couple of nonprofits, and the benefits cliff is a reality for some of the people that we serve. Perhaps I should have asked this question to the last panel as well. I'm curious if that's an impact, or does the benefits cliff impact you? And if so, is there a workaround for that?
I'll talk a little bit about it. From the Enlivian point of view, with the programs that we have, we can actually make it where the benefits cliff doesn't happen for the families in which we serve if they start working. Okay, so if you start working with us, normally your income would go up by 30%. Your income would go up as your rent would go up as your income would go up, right? But for at least a year after that, we're saying that you won't have any rent increases, so you're able to basically save those dollars during that period of time. Okay, so it really doesn't impact on the housing side. What I've seen it happen more on is on the standpoint of food stamps and other benefits of now that your income is going up, now that you don't need these other supports, and you absolutely do. And it puts families in a situation of saying, well, if I'm going to work and now I still don't have, food for my kids, it makes no sense for me to really go to work. And that is something that we need to, and Tim, that's something we need to work on to see exactly how we can help families and, well, more importantly, help policy, right? Because this is a policy. It's not just on the state level, it's on a national level of how do we really address this issue when we know the families are struggling. We need to find a way to give them that bridge that they need to get to self-sufficiency and not just start cutting it off immediately when they start going back to work, because it becomes a disadvantage for them to go to work.
Okay, David. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists. Appreciate it very much for your time this evening.
So if you're wondering who's next, it's these fine folks.
Thank you.
I feel like music should be playing while we're doing this. Yeah.
So good to be back. And thanks for everybody. I guess feels like we're starting to round this out a little bit. And just as we did the deep dive into housing, we wanted to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the jobs component of this. And so I want to thank all of my panelists for being here tonight. I will just go down the line and introduce you all briefly. Beside me, I have Blair Stanford with the CELC. She's the executive director. This also operates under the Foundation for the Carolinas. Many of you know her work from not just with the CELC, but also the Regional Business Alliance, as well as the Chamber back in the days. It's a while ago. Next, we have Robert Nesbitt with the county, and he is the Chief of Staff with Consolidated Human Services Agency. He also works within the departments of that has public health and social services, as well as community support services and community resources under it. Robert's been a great partner with us as we've worked through initiatives like HIRE, as well as our corridors of opportunity. Next, we have Raquel. Sorry, my order did not line up with the way everybody sat. That's okay. She's the Chief Program Officer at Goodwill and leads activities for all career service departments located at Goodwill Opportunity Campus, including the Career Center, Goodwill University, Family Stability Services, Evaluation and Assessment, and Partner Relations. Prior to serving at Goodwill, she was assisted programs with Crisis Assistance Ministry. So good perspective there. Next, we have Emily Cantrell. Some of you may remember Emily from when she worked at the city. Emily left us back in August. I still have not forgiven her for that. As we've talked about, talent is hard to come by. And Emily left to join Madeline Silver as the engagement director, where she leads corporate relationship development for existing and prospective clients to help promote the Madeline Silver's brand. Part of what we brought her here is that she really has a deep wealth of knowledge in workforce development, talent development, but also now more specifically in the tech industry. Emily led a study for us about tech talent, and we wanted her to come in and have that lens on that perspective. And then lastly, we have Anna London with Charlotte Works, the Chief Operating Officer, and she's the ultimate workforce champion I think that we have. And she manages performance compliance and continuous improvement, ensures that programming aligns with the organization's strategic workforce plan. So again, thank you everybody for being here and sticking with us this evening through all the programming. I want to start by thanking you all for being involved with HIRE Charlotte and really participating. You know, a lot of times I have conversations and people say, well, what is HIRE Charlotte? And to me, it's not as much about, you know, the 4 or 5 initiatives that we align behind, but really this group of people from the ecosystem coming together, working together to move our community forward when it relates to the jobs that we're creating, training, and recruiting to our community. So I just wanted to start, we can go down the line with your perspectives on being involved with the HIRE initiative and kind of how it aligns with your work.
Thank you. So the HIRE Charlotte initiative has been an awesome experience because of the people who are around the table. You sit in the room at those meetings and you see almost every partner that touches workforce in the community, and the ability to be together when there's a lot of fragmentation, there's some duplication in cases, and to be able to collectively come together with a plan was extremely powerful. And it was useful for me from an employer perspective. I think that the CLC can represent the employer perspective at that table. The CLT Alliance is at that table with the employer perspective. And so getting that into the room and having that be part of the solutions that HIRE Charlotte develops, I think was extremely powerful.
And I'll just build off of what Blair shared. Yeah, it's really a great group of folks around this table, and actually so many people who were on earlier panels and who are here in this room tonight are connected to HIRE Charlotte somehow. And one thing that's really stood out to me is the creative problem solving, trying to make sure that everybody has a pathway to employment. It's really about meeting people where they are, and that's one thing I really value about HIRE Charlotte. For example, it's not just about having an online pathway or an in-person pathway. It's making sure that solutions are tailored for individuals wherever they're at within their job search journey. It's going to look different for each person, how they obtain a job and what that right fit is, leading to economic mobility. But I really appreciate the HIRE Charlotte commitment to trying to help people have those pathways.
I will share that
that it's important, as important as it is for us to talk about employers, it is also important to understand and think about job seeker journey. So that's what we sit and think about, right? We know CLC is taking care of employers, and having Blair at the table is really important. We're having conversations. She's listening to what the job seekers' challenges may be during that job search. So that's important for us, that we had representation and somebody's thinking about that job seeker, that talent that may not know about the opportunities that exist or is being bypassed, really, frankly, by employers and others. So how do we shift that narrative so they can understand that they are actually valuable in this ecosystem?
Yeah, well said, everyone. And I think what stands out for me about the Hire Charlotte journey is that it took about 10,000 disparate conversations with a lot of different people and brought all of the major stakeholders together in a room that not only helped streamline the conversation, but helped streamline the data. And rolling in industry data from the CELC's participation is giving this effort real-time information to be more nimble in the strategies that all of these organizations are developing to address this common challenge in our community of economic mobility.
So I'll say ditto to everything that they said. But I'll also share, I think I remember the very first conversation about Hire Charlotte. And I remember Tracy was sitting at the end of the table and she said, this is not us, just creating a new fancy name to duplicate efforts that are happening. And so I'll say now, today, however much later that is, a year later, however long, it really hasn't been a duplication. I think, one of the things that was really impressive to me and what was really exciting to me was that it really was made up, Hire Charlotte really was initially and still is made up of many of the key players in the whole ecosystem. But then also one of the first things that we did was look at all of the other collaboratives and strategic plans and efforts that were happening in the community, and we did an inventory of those. And so you've heard many of those talked about today, and we really have aligned a lot of those priorities to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, and that wherever, one of the things I think Tracy said in the beginning was we are all staying in our lane, but we're still making sure that the priorities get done, whether we do them together or separate, all under the umbrella of Hire Charlotte or whatever other collaborative or strategic plan. So I think that's been really exciting, and what has made this different, that one of the first activities we did was look at an inventory of everything that's already happened, currently happening, and where are the gaps, what can we leverage, and then how can we work together to fill those gaps.
One of the things, and I said it a little bit before, it's really great to see how much collaboration and partnership we do have in this community. I say all the time with companies looking at Charlotte, what's different about Charlotte is that we're a community built on partnerships, and I think that's come out very evidently in a lot of the discussion points tonight. So thank you, everybody, for that. And I'm going to stay with you for a second and ask you to share a little bit of the work done by Charlotte Works ambassadors that support the residents out in the community, and how that also kind of ties in with some of the Hire Charlotte initiatives.
Sure. So Danielle mentioned it a little bit earlier, that a couple of years ago, we realized that we really needed to get out of our brick and mortar physical career centers and have career advisors, NC Works career advisors, physically located in the community. And so she mentioned a few of those, but we've got career advisors in the Mecklenburg County Community Resource Center. We have a career advisor in the sheriff's office serving individuals that are incarcerated and then working with them once they're released. We have a career advisor that works in Freedom Communities on the west side, as well as some of the YMCAs, as well as some of the libraries. And so when we looked at what Raquel mentioned, we looked at the job seeker journey, and not just the job seeker journey thinking that all job seekers are the same, but we really looked at what are the different types of job seekers that we serve as workforce providers. So we have something called the Workforce Providers Council, which is another collaborative that is well represented on Hire Charlotte. But we looked at who are the job seekers that we're serving? What are the unique challenges that they may face? What are the barriers they may face? And how can we serve each of them well and serve them differently? And then how can we meet them where they are in the community and then help them to access the other services that they need, those wraparound supports and supportive services? And so one of the priorities that has come out of Hire Charlotte in partnership with the CELC is a portal. And so a one-stop shop that job seekers can utilize to get access to jobs as well as services in the community. And we know that we need to have career advisors that are physically located in the community to help job seekers access that portal, to help them to access jobs, to help them access workshops, career advising, anything that they may need. And as we've said before, we stay in our lane, so we do workforce development, but we work alongside many of the other partners, many of the partners that I see here in the room, that I will pick up the phone and call and say, hey, can you help us with this individual? Or I'm sending someone over. Can you make sure that they get what they need, whether it's some type of supportive service, childcare, transportation, whatever that may need, or whatever their need may be. And so we are excited to continue expanding outreach efforts and focusing on, building capacity, but also meeting people where they are, whether it's in a neighborhood with another organization like a Goodwill, do what we do best alongside that organization and what they do best.
Great. So the conversation about the portal has opened up. Blair, you're going to talk a little bit more about the CELC's work with Radius on the Pathways portal and kind of how it's informing the community-facing connection to jobs and job seekers.
Yes, and I think Gerard's done some good job of kind of laying some groundwork here about what the portal is. But we've been working for about a year with a company called Radius to understand workforce and training from a supply and demand perspective. So what jobs are needed today? What jobs are going to be needed 3 years from now? And how do we start to train folks to fill that funnel? Because we're going to be most successful if it's win-win. It's win-win for the employers because they're finding trained talent, and it's win-win for those that need strong pathways to family-sustaining jobs. So CELC looks at all the work that they do through an economic mobility lens. So how can we help people get good jobs and fill needs at the same time for the employers? So we did a pilot in 2022 that involved 9 employers. We identified about 30 roles out of those employers that represent about 5,000 jobs that will need to be filled between now and the next 3 years. So the next phase of that pilot is how do we work with the training program trainers in the community, with the education institutions in the community to fill that demand. And we start to understand specifically what that is. Gerard's shared specific roles that Atrium is going to need to fill today and in the future. So how do we start training for those? And if the trainers, providers aren't there to be able to provide that training, how do the employers come to the table in a partnership to make that possible? So that information then informs the portal. So when those looking for jobs, they can see, where can I get training for this job? And we look at the types of jobs through their accessibility. Can you be trained for it easily? Is there a low cost of training? So low barriers to getting into the position. Does it have a pathway that continues to grow and gives you career growth? And is there going to be substantial opportunity there? And so that can inform what's provided on the portal and connect people not only with the jobs, but also with the training opportunities to be successful in those jobs.
Great, thank you. So you talked a lot about the training. Raquel, I'm going to come to you and ask you to shed a little bit light on Goodwill's efforts to train residents in more of the hard technical skills. I'll ask another one later about more of the soft skills, but on the hard technical skills.
Sure, yeah. I was thinking, actually reflecting there on my prior experience of working in nonprofit for housing and how I wanted to work in solutions that will alleviate people going into being homeless, right? So when I started working at Goodwill, one of the things that I really wanted to do is help the organization understand what is actually more impactful. So one of the things that we did, and back then in 2017 and 18, people did not believe, right, that we could actually help people in this community who were low income find jobs that actually will remedy those solutions. So think about the fact that in 2017 and 18, people were not thinking about the future of work. I was, for sure. I was thinking about what the heck are we going to do to help all these people understand that the jobs are going to be virtual in the future, that people are going to work from home more. Didn't know a pandemic was going to help me get there faster at all, I will say that. But I do know that I was thinking about how do we increase wages. So the way we thought about it was actually we needed to find and understand what employers' needs were, but also understand what are the educational career pathways that we could actually achieve. And the two that we chose was technology, so the sort of the hard skills that we knew people could actually appreciate, that you could learn in a 8 to 17 week course and actually get to a job that will pay you at the time. We were thinking, well, let's see if we could get to $17 an hour. Well, you know, by year 2 of our strategy, we were actually achieving $19 an hour. Well, Fulton just screwed up my entire goals because, you know, right now I'm at $21 an hour and our average income but he just told us it's going to be $34 an hour what I need to achieve in order to help people. Right? So really we need to start thinking, and I'm still thinking about how do we do that? We've been lucky enough that also construction has been something that has been very helpful. So that's the second strategy. The city has actually helped us with a cohort that we call Renew. Through that, we have actually been able to even implement pilots with women in construction. So also helping understand that it's not just basic construction. For 10 years, we did basic construction. We shifted to now do electrical, to do HVAC, which is what the city helped us do, but also drones. We're actually doing drones right now, and the implications of drones in the construction industry is tremendous. And to see those young adults really transform themselves to understand how much technology is impacting the construction industry and actually how much opportunity there is today is something that we could only dreamed about in 2017. So for us, it's really important to think about hard skills that are not just for today, but for the future. So when we're now shifting our thinking around customer service and what that means, you'll ask me later about how that actually aligns with essential skills for the future.
Thank you. Robert, we've talked a little bit about, you've heard it come up a couple of times about barriers to entry. Talk to me a little bit about what the county is doing, either whether it's barriers that keep people from employment or in other workforce development initiatives.
Sure, it's a great question. And so just to level set, the county invests approximately $16 million in workforce-related initiatives, and that's for a really wide range of families and individuals and people with all different kinds of life experiences. Hearing colleagues speak, Judy earlier and Fulton earlier, we have one program in particular, the Unified Workforce Development, that serves people with the most complex barriers related to employment. A lot of times it's chronic homelessness, it's chronic substance use, chronic mental health conditions. And what we've seen is that with the right wraparound supports, we're able to connect people to sustainable employment, often with wages of $17 an hour, wages that people had not experienced before this point in their life. We want to make sure we have opportunities for people to connect with employment pathways at various points throughout the county. We have our Community Resource Center model, which we're very lucky to have a partnership with Charlotte Works there, where people can come and be referred for employment services through Charlotte Works. That, for example, is just one pathway. I want to also acknowledge that there is the libraries. The library system is often under-recognized for the incredible value that it plays in helping people connect to employment pathways. A lot of times that's just job searching or talking with a librarian for resume assistance, but across our community we have these kind of front door portals to exploring a job pathway or job opportunity. We also have, of course, Charlotte Works and the NC Works Career Center, and as Anna spoke to, they've done a really great job with kind of the ambassador model going out into the community. We try to do something similar where we make sure that we have community-based social workers who provide tailored case management to help people connect to jobs and employment. But I think what you can hear from all of this is that it takes this kind of creative approach that meets people where they are, because each person's pathway is going to be so different in helping them achieve economic mobility. Did I answer your question?
No, that was great, and I think that's part of what makes this so challenging, is because each pathway is different, and so that it's hard to serve a lot of people when everyone is different. Emily, switch to you. We identified through the Hire Charlotte process that tech was a target industry. We've obviously seen a lot of growth around this in Charlotte over the years. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the landscape in your new role.
Yeah, great question. I think anyone who's lived in Charlotte for the last couple of years has noticed that technology is exploding in our city, especially over the last 2 years. That's been driven by our financial services industry as banks rapidly move towards financial technology, mobile banking platforms. And so a lot of the technology growth in Charlotte and the Charlotte region has been fueled for the last several years by financial services. I think if not for the pandemic, healthcare would be very close behind. I think healthcare had a setback, right, with advancing technologies, but they are a close second runner-up in terms of an industry that will be rapidly consuming tech talent. Charlotte is well positioned because we are very strong in both of those industries. So all projections, and not the doomsday, layoffs that you're hearing in the news, but everything that we're seeing for this local economy and region is that we will continue to have sustained growth in technology. It won't be as strong as the last 2 years, but I think every industry is seeing a little bit of a constriction right now, but technology will be very steady and very strong, and Charlotte will continue to outpace the nation in terms of industry strength and growth. So it is 100% a sector to be integrating into every workforce development opportunity. Just as an aside, I have 2 young kids and they say, what am I going to be when I grow up? And I say, well, I can tell you with certainty that one aspect of your corporate identity, your career identity will be that you will be a technologist, because as our industries continue to change, technology will be integrated into everything that our future generations will be doing in their working lives. And that's something that's really important to keep in mind through these conversations.
Raquel, I'm going to come back to you really quickly because I mentioned it earlier. Talk about the importance of the soft and essential skills. And, that was another recommendation or initiative out of Hire, and the importance of that. And then, Anna, maybe you might answer the same question from your perspective.
So yeah, I was going to say the two are technology and the other is essential skills. And essential skills is a new name we're using instead of using soft skills, because we know the lack of soft skills is a heartland, right? And so we didn't think it was actually a good terminology. It is the technical term for it, but it's really the ability to utilize the skill sets that we all have, our strengths, in a way that allows us to be successful in the work. The research, until 2015, really talked about if employers were continuing to seek, and it was a dire need that their employees had strong social skills or essential skills. In 2019, the Stanford Institute research actually said that it's actually a determinant of what the financial outcomes of individuals and also their projection towards growth in the organization. So it is imperative that when we actually are trying to train our staff or our current staff, and also people that we want to make sure that they succeed in their career, that we think about essential skills. Examples of that will be communication, strong communication, not just being able to articulate what you're thinking, but also listening is important. The ability to summarize what you're thinking in a way that actually is able to be understood by your coworkers and others. Digital skills is part of what we call essential skills. So just give you a sense of what we mean by that. I think it's important to also mention that culturally, essential skills actually being hijacked by one group, right? So it is important to also take into account that when we talk about certain essential skills, we also are talking about the majority of groups. And just to be honest, it's actually how do we translate that to groups that are not the majority? So it is something that we, as a group, as a coalition, we thought it would be important for us to be strong about what we mean by that. Replace the curriculum that we've been using as a collective in a way that actually recognizes the individuals that we're trying to support in a way that doesn't diminish the dignity as we're doing it.
Sure. I think the only thing that I would add to that is I think that it shows that we do listen to feedback from our partners, from the community, from the business community. So making sure that this essential skills curriculum is industry-led. Our previous one was industry-led as well, but we did receive a lot of feedback. And the curriculum that we have used is Working Smart. It's a great curriculum, and it will probably continue to be used in some way, shape, or form, but it was really targeted toward one niche of the job seeker population, or one segment of the job seeker population, and not really universal for all. And so as we continued over the last few years to facilitate this curriculum and hearing feedback, now, really incorporating that feedback to say, you know what, some of those things are not so great, and some of the terms that are used shouldn't be used. And so we are, I think that shows, though, that we do take feedback seriously, and whenever people ask us to pivot, we will pivot and change. And so another thing about this essential skills curriculum too that we've I think is important is that it will be plug and play. And so not everybody needs to go through the same curriculum, all of the lessons. So people can test in or test out of certain things. Certain businesses may want their employees to take certain pieces of it and maybe not others. And so trying to really be as flexible and as accommodating as possible to make sure that it is industry-led, but it also caters to the universal job seeker.
Great. Thank you. Switching over quickly to the employers, how do we keep really them engaged? What have you seen over the time with CELC and even before that of keeping the employers engaged in this conversation?
Well, I think it's a lot easier now because they have to be involved in this conversation, because the ability to find good workers and keep good workers gets more and more challenging. So they're at the table. The opportunity to have them focused on economic mobility and maybe audience of job seekers that they haven't in the past is where the opportunity is. And I think that communicating the fact that that's a necessity to be able to fill jobs in the future, that they have to be at the table in training folks and creating those workers and getting them certified or trained, they have to be at the table for that. And I think you're seeing a real appetite for it. I mean, I think, Atrium's a good example of being really creative and innovative about how they're going to create their workforce of the future. And you're seeing that through multiple large organizations because they're simply seeing the need. So it's a lot easier today to do that.
Robert, I'm going to go to you really quick. You hit on something that I would just like for you to expand on, because one of the things we've heard from council members as well as the community and a lot of people in the Hire Initiative, and you said it, is you have to meet people where they are. And then you referenced some work that you were doing with the community resource centers with Charlotte Works. So we expand on that a little bit, and then give me some more thoughts about kind of how we continue to meet people where they are in physical locations.
Yeah, so I'll give some extra context to community resource centers for anyone who's not familiar with those. It's an initiative led by the Board of County Commissioners and our county manager that really was a vision to ensure that people could receive county services and government services and community partner services close to wherever they lived. And we mapped out the heat map essentially of where individuals with the highest service utilization were residing within the county. That included SNAP benefits, WIC benefits, any number of county resources, and it essentially mirrored the crescent, which I'm sure everyone in here is familiar with. And so with that model, we've created a roadmap for creating community resource centers and areas that have a greater need for service availability in that area. We have our prototypes community resource center that's at our Valerie C. Woodard Center off of Freedom Drive. I'd invite anyone who hasn't been to reach out to me, come by and tour the community resource center. It's really incredible because we want to create a space that is not what is thought of as the standard government operations. We want it to be a welcoming space, a trauma-informed space, a very, very well-lit, friendly place where people come and they know they can get help in a timely manner. We're opening our Northeast Community Resource Center this summer in 2023, so that will be really our first full community resource center location. And it is all about meeting people where they are. And so it could be a mom with 2 children who comes in, and we could help her get connected to child care subsidy and then help her connect to the Charlotte Works team as well. Or we could help someone apply for WIC benefits there all at the same time so people don't have to go from location to location. In terms of in-person services, I think they're are opportunities where we have existing resources and really work on ways of maximizing those. I saw MT here earlier with the library, I believe, and that is something we are exploring more of, working closely with his team, is how can we make sure that librarians are aware of basic job resources and employment resources. And Anna's team has done some training with the library team on helping to make that a reality. So it's really about making it easy when people come to seek services from us, that we're there to really accept them and to meet them where they are and to ensure that it's tailored based on whatever their needs or their experience may be.
Thank you. I got one last question for Emily, and then we might just let everybody make a couple of thoughts to close it out before we open it up for a question. Emily, talk to me a little bit about what we think our strengths and our opportunities are in the tech kind of industry for Charlotte specific or Charlotte region specific, and then how that might pair into hire a little bit.
Yeah, great. Again, a strength is that we have stable employment and employment that's projected to continue to grow and create opportunities for technologists in our community. I think an opportunity, I'll kind of spin it into also one of our strengths. Charlotte is well positioned to be the national leader for minorities in technology, for increasing opportunities for minorities and women in technology because of the demographics of our community and because we have amazing community partners such as programs like A Road to Hire or a YTAC, youth apprenticeship program that's introducing STEM to kids through esports, right? Everyone complains, oh, my kids are gaming. Well, actually, your kids are preparing themselves for the jobs of the future, right? And if you can apply that in a creative and innovative way, like some of our existing programs have, we're seeing incredible results. And so that, coupled with our corporate commitment around increasing minorities and women in technology, just really sets us up to lead the nation in increasing the pretty dismal percentages right now for women and people of color in technology. So it's exciting that there's a lot of positive momentum in that space and opportunity for Charlotte to really lead in that way.
Great, thank you. So just quickly go down the line again. As you're looking into 2023, it's obvious that we have a lot of collaboration, that we're all talking a lot, thinking a lot, and strategizing a lot. But what do you think the focus should be? What do you think, if you just have any quick words of guidance? You all live in this space day in and day out.
For me, I think it's data and making sure that we're making decisions based on what current and future needs are. Thank you for letting me go first again. It makes it way easier.
It's a benefit of sitting beside me.
Data is essential, and I'll say too, this was touched on throughout, but really hearing both sides of the equation when it comes to employment. So hearing from employers about the jobs that they need to fill and the talent that they are seeking and the skills they need, and also really understanding the complexity of everyone, all of the different people seeking employment in our community, and trying to, as much as possible, kind of bridge those two worlds. And that's what's so exciting about this initiative, the CELC's work, and Hire Charlotte in general, is just creating that bridge across the employer-employee divide.
Yeah, I'll keep it simple. I'll say focusing on what's impactful, right? The data will tell us what is impacting and what could be impacted, but the work needs to be focused on that impact. And I think understanding that impact could influence also the outcomes for housing that we also are seeking in this summit. So I think that will be important.
Yeah, and selfishly, I would just say, continued integration of technology as it drives industry and will continue to drive industry, also and how it can help our existing workforce upskill, not to forget those who are working who will need continued development to stay competitive in their careers.
So I'll say ditto again. But I'll also say I think that we are on our way to do this. But I think that we've put a lot of focus, as we should have, on serving job seekers and how do we serve them well, how do we serve them differently to meet their unique needs. And we are on our way to do this, but really serving, I think what Robert said too, serving businesses better. So whenever businesses tell us what they need, we do everything we do is industry driven, data driven, industry led, but really listening to the business and serving them well, and being I would say, more attentive to the business's needs. I think that we're doing a much better job of that now, but I would say that's something that we're focused on going into this year.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And we'll open it up for a couple of quick questions. I saw a quick hand back there with Tanya.
Oh, I got it. Tanya Jameson with Leading on Opportunity. Guys, don't boo me, but I've heard most of this entire presentation today, and one thing I did not hear anyone talk about is policy. What is the role of policy in enacting the change that we want to see in housing and jobs?
It's a huge role, and Tanya, I've been lucky enough to work with you on some policy projects, but it is. I mean, it's essential. I know Fulton touched on that. I mean, with SNAP benefits, for example, again, it's a county-operated service, but the policy is set at the federal level. Child care subsidy, you can see policy that's set at the state level. Working with some colleagues at the county, we did create an opportunity for households to apply who are over a certain benefits income limit of 200% federal poverty level, so 200 to 300% rather than that normal cutoff. But policy really does have to be a focus, because at the end of the day, if there are policies that we can't change at a federal level, we have to get really creative on finding ways to solve for that at a local level. And there are opportunities for that, but we have to be very strategic about what that looks like. So it's a great question.
Okay, sorry. Lee Altman from Mecklenburg County Commissioner. I really like her question, because we have to be results oriented in everything we do. And so a policy decision that Mecklenburg County has recently pivoted to is to ensure that the programs that we fund actually place people in jobs, versus funding good programs, hope it all turns out well. Really looking for a correlation between outcomes and the money we've invested. And I think that's a great example, and we need to continue to scale that up. And thank you for asking.
So a second question?
Hi, I'm Ashley Hawkins with the Charlotte Metrolina Labor Council. How do you plan, or how are your organizations currently working with existing training and apprenticeship programs provided by local labor unions to assist in your workforce development needs?
All right. So we at Charlotte Works, we have a list of about, I would say, 150 to 200 local programs that we fund and support for individuals to go through short-term training programs. So if there is a program that we're not aware of, please let us know. And so that is one of the things that we do. So short-term training programs, we provide training scholarships for individuals, and we make sure that those training programs do lead to an industry-recognized credential as well as employment. So yeah, Goodwill is one of our providers as well.
All right, I think that about rounds it up. I want to thank again this panel for participating in all the collaboration with Hire Charlotte.
You can hum the exit music in your head as the mayor comes to wrap us up.
I want to say thank you to all of the community organizations and residents who sat through this today, and those that came and helped us, encouraged us, and gave us the information. I hope that you'll stick with us as we go through this journey on how we recognize how we can combine housing and jobs. I want to thank each of our speakers, because what we did was we had Resilient Cities kick us off, and each presenter gave us their perspectives of what the shocks and the stressors are. Now tomorrow, your elected officials standing here with me today will reconvene, and this will be shown. It'll be at the Government Center. It's on Facebook and the city's TV. I don't know the name of it. I can't remember. I just turn on the remote works. That's all it really have to have. Oh, the Gov channel, the Gov channel, and on the city's Facebook page. And we will be in the Government Center if you choose to want to come in and see the remainder of this discussion. Tomorrow, I believe that we will begin some important discussions based upon what you have given us as information today. We hope that we will again begin to think about how do we take the resources that we have today and look at them in innovative ways so that we can be the resilient city, that we can maintain our competitive edge, that we can support everyone in our community, that every resident has the opportunity to have a decent place to live, a good paying job, and the ability to travel between the two of them. But more importantly, I like to say that Charlotte would have the quality of life that each of us would want for each other. And so with that, we will recess this meeting, the Housing and Jobs Summit, to reconvene tomorrow morning after our special meeting, which is scheduled to start at 8:30 a.m. I know. Council, 8:30 a.m. And then we will continue our discussion, and this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much for everyone.